Welcome back to On Patrol Podcast. This is episode 19, How the West Was Won or Lost with Dead Man's Hand, Redux, Deep Dive Rule Review. As always, I am Windhurst Production, joined with the esteemed
Fighting Kentuckian.
And today we're going to go through our thoughts on this set of rules. But before we get into that, as always, we like to start with alibis, caveats, and piggybacks. Kentuckian, what do you have for us?
Great episode with Corey last time. I'll let you talk about, we had some snafus and stuff, but great episode. Really check it out. I'm standing by to watch for their Black Friday sale. Great mats as always. I really enjoy talking to people who are steeped in the hobby and have the knowledge. And when we do interviews, it's part of my I just really enjoy it. It's good to hear other people's kind of walks in it and how they've been able to expand it, the challenges they face. It's really something. I know when we've gotten message before, people are really enjoying some of the interviews that we do with the industry and the community. So we're gonna continue to keep those coming quarterly, if not more. Other things, kind of, I think since I last talked to you guys, I told you about a tournament that was happening that I went to, and it was the last Bolt Action version 2 tournament I was going to. It was hosted at the Pat Museum by Sean, the 502nd, kind of out of Louisville there, Kentucky. Great event. I think they had like almost 20 players, somewhere in there, 16, 20, something like that. Really great event. And I took my 7th Panzer Division, my Ghost Division that I'd played like when I first started doing tournaments in Ohio, and was able to, by the skin of my teeth, win it all. And I think there's a golden MG34 that I'm pointing at that's on my shelf right now. Really just a fun time. Jeff came down from Michigan, had a bunch of great tables of terrain. Those guys in that club, the 502nd, just awesome group of people. James Napier, all of them, just amazing. Really supportive in the hobby, do great events. If you have a club or if you're building one, I would really try to model it after those guys and gals up there. They do an awesome job. And then, as you've seen on progress reports, I'm gaming a lot of the rule set we're going to be reviewing today, and doing a lot of painting for that period, and getting terrain kind of compiled together. So we'll talk more about that as we get into it. And then getting fatter as Thanksgiving is upon us, and my diet is gotten awful, and my running has gone down with the on the weekends and stuff. You got to run mandatory with the military, but for PT and physical training. But on the weekends, I normally kind of run for fun and some things like that. Can't do that as much when it's, just blowing rain on you and everything else. And I got the kids. I normally like to take them in the strollers with me. I don't care too much about myself getting totally drenched, but it's hard to do, which is as we like to call them in the military, bull crap excuse. But moving on, Windhurst, what about yourself? Alibis, caveats, piggybacks.
Yeah. So last month's episode we had some technical issues, and we hopefully, knock on wood, aren't going to have them today. Just something with the platforms we're using not agreeing, and lost my microphone. And then when we posted the episode, we had some issues with YouTube where it was available through link only, so our numbers were quite low. I don't think you could only access it from the link we shared for like a solid week until we realized that was the problem. But we both have worked full jobs. This is not our job. We just do this for fun. So sometimes these technical issues come up, and we're not experts on it. But hopefully that was a good learning lesson for me, since I do most of our technical side. I'm
just an army grunt. I can't like.
The ASVAB score is not high enough. The interviews are really great, as Kentuckian said. I've been really thankful for those, as this is the episode before our year in review episode next month. We'll talk about it more, but the ability to sit down and talk with people who are as passionate about the hobby as we are is amazing. I was just talking to an individual on base who approached me because I've got flyers out like, hey, if you're interested in wargaming. And he's like, yeah, I like to board game and stuff. And I was telling him about it. He's like, aren't you a little young for historical wargaming? I was like, dude, I mean, if you like the military and you like military history, what better hobby is there than historical wargaming? And so to kind of build on something Kentuckian just said, if you are a historical wargamer and you want to run events and you have a museum nearby, I highly encourage you reaching out to them to host events at their museum. And 9 times out of 10, they'll probably be super excited to have you in. And that's a great opportunity to expose people who are already interested in the genre, in military history, that there is a way to embrace and enjoy and connect with that history more than just going and seeing a museum. That's a great venue for events and stuff. Because, yeah, I guess there's still people out there who think this is an old, crusty, dude's game. But, that's what this podcast is for, is to kind of break that mold and let you know that there's these young, handsome gentlemen out there playing games like this. But, yeah, that's all I got for caveats, alibis, and piggybacks. Kentucky, you want to introduce the episode and we'll get started?
Yeah, so just like Windhurst said, so how was the West won or lost, right? From the blood-stained streets of Tombstone, the dusty saloons of Dodge City, the high plains, ranches, and farmsteads, stagecoach routes, and wooden beam and steel rails of the locomotive tracks that paved the way for some of the bloodiest and most iconic historical, fictional, cinematic duels in all of human history, right? Now join us on this episode of On Patrol as we use the backdrop of all of those things to review Dead Man's Hand, Redux, Redo, I've heard it called a few things, rule set. The original rule set was released, Dead Man's Hand, in 2013, and in 2024 it received a new update with Dead Man's Hand Redux. The authors boast the new rule set is the same game, but has an updated deck, new faction builds, new scenes, expanded rules, and an easy-to-pick-up campaign system. So, well, we didn't bring, these 6 shooters to shine on. So grab your spear, your shield, your musket, that belt-fed machine gun, or your trusty Colt and Smith & Wesson, and join us on this episode of On Patrol. Windhurst, I'll kick it back to you.
Yep. So before we get into it, a couple disclaimers. One, whenever we do our deep dives, we've got 10 sections we're going to be evaluating the rules at to kind of break it down. And then each of us are going to give each section a score out of 10. So our final score is going to be out of 100. And this is just kind of reflect on a spectrum and compare to our other rules we've reviewed, how we feel about the game. Another disclaimer as well is that both Kentuckian and I are coming from other sets of Wild West rules that we have played in the past. Both of us have very fond memories of Legends of the Old West. I'm also a big proponent of Fistful of Lead, and Kentuckian, you played Desperado. It was one of your first early games ever, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I just want to put that out there that, we have sets of rules that we're like, all right, this is our go-to, or this is what we're used to. So we're jumping into the Redux version. We haven't played any of the other versions before. And so just keep that in mind how we grade things. It's not like this is our first Western game ever. So our results might be based off of, well, it's not like this, or it might be different from that, our experience. So because we are gamers who like to play lots of different games, we're exposed to a lot of different styles. So some things they do here might be brand new mechanic for you, but not for us. So just to put that out there. So our first section when we do these deep dive is we're going to look at presentation. So does it have books, PDFs, ebooks, how are they laid out and everything. And the first part of that is how is it laid out. I will say, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm holding it up here, it is an absolute beautiful set of rules. This is like a gold standard how rule books should look. It is got great color, full color photos all throughout that are just phenomenal. All of the diagrams and references are actual photos, no illustration. So I would say layout is absolutely beautiful. How do you feel about the layout, Kentuckian?
I agree with you. I think it's really a great rule book to be, kind of a paperback-ish, a little bit more reinforced. Um,
It's
it's
good
we
quality
talked.
paperback too.
Yeah, it holds up. You know, the corners, I've set drinks on mine already and stuff, and nothing, no issue. And I've kind of thrown it around as well, and like taken it. I had to play some games, decent travel away from here, and so taking it, you know, throwing it in a backpack and stuff like that, kind of loose is scary. I've had some other rule books I've done that with, and you know, they've been ripped to shreds. So definitely, you know, top notch. I agree with you. Pictures are beautiful. The painted models are amazing.
Really
And
inspiring.
yeah, and that's what you want out of a rule book. Does this tickle your you know, fancy? Does this get the hobby juices flowing? The only thing I want to add to this is what you've talked about already. Um, no PDF.
Yeah.
Boo. You know, I understand why companies do it, and I get it. You know, you get one guy in a hobby club or wargaming club of 10, 15 people, and they share the one PDF. They bought the rules once, and then everybody owns it. Like, I get it. That is, you know, something you've got to guard against, especially in today, with just the way people share and do those things with rule sets. However, you know, and I have to be honest, like, I will let somebody look at my PDF if it's, you know, over the shoulder or something. I think rarely do I email PDF to somebody. Normally, if it's I'm trying to close a deal and talk them into it, you know, getting an army or something like that. But we're always on our phone. We're always on, you know, electronic devices and those things. And rather than scrolling through your news feed, your Instagram, whatever you do, there's sometimes where I like the PDF, like army list books that I have and stuff like that, where I can go and kind of just like, hey, I'm waiting for an appointment. I'm going here. I've got 5 seconds, and you know, I can kind of review something or something that came up in the game. And not having the ability to do that is a little tedious. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the you know, companies have to protect their IP. I get it, but I don't know. I don't know if it's something where there's some type of access that can be granted, or something with the PDF. I really it. It's a double-edged sword. I'm saying the reasons why they're doing it, and I know that I assume that's what they are. But it just would be super helpful, I think. So that was my out of the things we discussed. But that's all I have for how laid out. 50 pages, which
It's
only
not.
really 30 pages of rules. Not big, but like you said, it is a pristine product.
Yeah.
Very nice.
It's got a good finish on the outside, like you said. That it feels like it's going to hold up. Like you said, put drinks and stuff on it. The cover is fairly thick, but yeah. And I agree with PDFs. Like, I understand the economics of protecting the IP, but and you know, there's been times where you've shared, like, you tried to get me into a set of rules and shared. I will not play a game off a PDF. Like, I can't do it. I have to have a
Same.
physical book to play a game. And so for me,
Yeah.
it's like, it's a good way to be like, okay, I need to reference stuff. Like you said, on the go, the PDF is always helpful. But I don't know. Maybe that is a concern as the new generations who are growing up now with tablets and stuff, that they might be more comfortable with that. I'm not even going to print a PDF usually and use it unless that's the only form it comes in. Like some, you know, more independent rules. But yeah, I think a large portion of the hobby, as of right now, you're safe from losing too much business from just doing PDFs. But I don't know. So moving on, other parts about is it easy and intuitive to read? For the most part, for me, it was very easy to read through. We'll talk about, we'll kind of combine some of these. So, like, sections, do they build on each other? I felt generally they were good about building on each other. There was one thing that really threw me off, and that is their stats is way back towards kind of like the back of the rules section. And that's where they talk about hits. And it's just a small thing, like, what do hits mean? And that's where it's like the number of under fire markers you take. And once you get more than that, your guy's gone. And so up until I got to that point, because nowhere does it says how do our hits accrued, you know, what does a hit count as or anything. And so, like, I was like, I thought I understood the stat block really simply just looking at it. Like, it seems intuitive, but the mechanics weren't written in anywhere. And so that was like a little confusing. But for those who are on YouTube, along the sides of the rules, they have the sections written out. So, like, you can, like, thumb through it really quickly. looking for like faction cards, action cards, live nerve tests. And that kind of helps with the speed of, going through it and referencing things. But other than that, it has a fairly generic, and by generic, I mean, we see it throughout the industry, like build on each other. Like, here's the basic mechanics. Here's the actions you can do. Here's what they are, and going through it. Kentucky, do you have any thoughts on ease to read, how the sections build on each other?
That's a great point that you said. I do think it's, cards playing the game, movement, shooting, kind of walks you through what we're all familiar with in reading a tabletop rule set. I think one of the things that we talked a little bit about that I think it's hard to do, and I've kind of nitpicked on a lot of these smaller skirmish type games for doing this, is callbacks to like where they may apply in different sections. So it does a decent job. It has a few of those in there, I think.
Yeah, it does.
But there's some times where I thought it could have been, maybe highlighted, like, in big bold or something, to say, okay, don't forget this part of the. It's just when you have a small skirmish game where you're only using a handful of models, a lot of the rules, in order for the game to be kind of systematic, engaging, as skirmish games are and stuff, interact with each other, and the different sections will interact with each other. And then, so how do you connect those two without basically writing a shooting section in a movement section? And I think like clear, crisp callbacks can do that. I thought they did a decent job at it. You always want more, and you especially, I think it may go to the noviceness of when you're learning a new rule set, like we were with Dead Man's Hand, to have that kind of cleaner, crisper callback. Yeah. But because again, like the veteran never cracks open the rule book normally, right? When they're like, oh, I know this, and so it's more intuitive to them after they've played, dozens and dozens of games. Where I think we've got in, around, between the two of us, somewhere around 20 games, and so I think that's like, that could have been a little bit more helpful to the younger. But that's my only kind of thing as far as sections building on each other and those things, and easy and intuitive.
They do rule page references quite often throughout here. Like on this one page, like just one page I'm looking at, there's at least 3 like page reference. So it's like, under this, we mentioned like this, like townsfolk page reference 16, and then it's like, falling, page reference this for what falling does, and so they do try to, which, like Kentuckian says, is important in a small set of rules like this. It does mean you're going to have some flipping back and forth, but at least they're telling you where to go for it. Yep. And as we'll talk about, it's such a simple set of rules that it doesn't take very much. I don't know if you had any issues in yours. I had 1 or 2 pages with a little bit of like ink was fading when it got printed, where there's like a faded line from manufacturing. That kind of detracts from the prettiness of it, but it was only on like 1 or 2 pages.
I have 3 rule books. I bought 2 for myself, and then I bought 1 for a buddy. And I don't have that much of an issue. The one issue I would say I had is it has nothing to do with the rule book. Barely worth mentioning. The corners were a little bit bent when it came in, and it just came from England, so yeah. I assume that's what it was. But no, out of those 3, nothing really. They all look the same in the flip throughs.
Other stuff on this, so diagrams and examples, it has both. So it has lots of clearly marked in big black bold ink example in a nice color-coded box that's different from the rest of the page, so it's nice and stands out. It doesn't confuse or mix in with the rest of the text, which is nice. It's a very clear when they want to give you an example. This is quite common in rules, and I'm not necessarily a huge fan. They do like the talking heads throughout the rule books. I know a lot of skirmish rule books, I mean even larger scale skirmish rule books like Bolt Action do stuff like this. I almost never read them. I mean, they add flavor and character, I guess, but they don't do anything for me. If it's something you like, though, they do that, and they do it in such a way that I don't feel as intrusive. Like, as somebody who doesn't care for them, could take them or leave them, they don't bother me the way they're done here. I've seen rule sets where it's done too much, or it's almost like part of the way they're telling you the rules and it detracts from the rules. And there's a particular set of modern rules that does that. Kentucky knows the one I'm talking about. But here it's nice and tasteful. And then, like I was saying earlier, all their example diagrams, so they have lots of charts when there's charts needed, but their examples diagrams are photos of actual models as opposed to like an illustration, so they couldn't be more clear. Do you have any other thoughts you want to add on diagrams and examples?
I agree with diagrams and examples completely. Page 5 with cards, 13 for interruptions, handful of overhead gameplay, which I like. I don't know how I feel about opposed to the graphic picture that you'll see in a lot of rule books where it's just like square block or unit.
Yeah.
But when you see the overhead kind of footage of like, hey, this is the model on the table, here's the exact thing that we're talking about, so we can walk you through. I think that's pretty nifty. I thought most of the examples were pretty easy to walk through. Like this one's got the players with their cards and how you're doing initiative. Like that's fairly simple. And I think it's a pretty good walkthrough. So you can't really leave it up to chance or a computer graphic image kind of trying to show you what that looks like on the tabletop. So I'm a fan of that. And it doesn't have a lot. Like we said, I think I'm going to go back to this throughout is if you break down the rules to, and we'll get into indexes, but if you break down the rules to, what you need to play, you're looking at, before you get to acts and scenes, the scenarios, 30 pages. 30 pages is pretty easy to kind of, you're not rocket science at 30 pages. It's a lot more than the one-page rule sets, but it's very quick, very simple, and easy. And the only thing I'll harken back to is, so what Windhurst was talking about with a lot of the characters talking, or giving examples, or like a personal vignette of, you got to punch him in the mouth or something, or this is how you handle it. I think it's good. I don't mind it. I think it adds some flavor to it. So I'm kind of like more on board with, I like it, I guess I would say. One of the things is they're the different faction leaders. And so you kind of are, it's a little bit of what I would think would be like character development is how they snuck in. Like most of the time when I see them do these in the rule sets, it's does everybody remember old Microsoft Word or whatever it was? There had the one paper clip that would tell you like what to click on and how to do it. And so in some rule sets, it's like one individual person, or like even if you played a computer game, it's like, hey, I'm, your Oompa Loompa or whatever, and I'm going to teach you how to do all these things. This one, it's all the different faction like leads, like the lawman, the boss, the black female, and they are telling you a little bit about how to do a mechanic or something like that. And I think they're weaving in a little bit of, they're trying to give the people on this cover who are the leads, for the different factions, a little bit more of a deeper character dive without you, having to read a book. So I think that was a goal that they had in mind as well, without just doing the tutorial stuff. So I think that was nuanced. I'm for it. No big issues out of me on it. Support it. And then, like I said, everything else on the examples and diagrams were pretty straightforward, pretty easy, well done.
Yeah, I think graphic diagrams are really useful if you have very complicated or more complicated, we'll say, movement and spotting rules.
Yeah.
And I mean, like the movement rules for this are so simple. They're like, if you just go into buildings or out of buildings and stuff and in and out of doors, it's really simple. And so I think not having that there's nothing missed. Quick reference sheets and indexes. So one thing we'll kind of talk about mechanics is this rule is in centimeters, all the measurements, which hurts my American brain. Except what they do, and I'm mentioning this for quick reference. So, yes, the very front page is a quick reference sheet, and the back cover is also a quick reference sheet. And they were so nice for us whiny Americans to make the back one in inches with all the important stuff. But throughout the rest of the rules, and like as I first started reading this, like, oh, why did you do this to me? Everybody else just agrees to do it in inches for us for the most part. But I really appreciate that they took that effort to. They didn't have to. They could just be like, you know what? No, we're here in Europe and we're going to do it this way. But I appreciate that they did that. It made it so much easier, especially playing it with my kids and stuff. Because that's just how we understand the world, for better or worse. But yeah, there are 2 quick reference sheets because of that, and it is it's a good quick reference sheet. Like Kentucky and I were talking beforehand, it really has everything you need to know to play the game once you've read through the rules like once or twice. And index, no index or
No index.
There's a table of contents at least. A fairly detailed table of contents. So I don't know. You might think Kentuckian it's like a borderline index / table of contents.
I was gonna make a nod to that. I think it's probably closer to an index where it's the 30 pages. You're looking at a few sections take up half a page or 1 page. So.
But under each, so like under shooting, and this is in the table of contents, people. So under shooting, it's got like a dozen subcategories. Yeah. And it'd be like shooting modifiers table, line of sight is on this page, out of ammo is on this page. So they've kind of, instead of doing like a traditional index, which might actually have it spelled out, and the page, they just put that all in the table of contents, which is a very clever, easy way to do it and keep your page count down. Other thoughts, Kentuckian, on quick reference sheets, indexes?
Nope. Quick reference sheets are awesome. The front and back one's great. I'm so glad that Great Escape Games did that with the centimeters and helped keep us, everybody else that's off the metric system kind of in the game and in the fight. So yeah, I fully support that. Indexes, I concur with everything you said. I do think it's a clever way, and I do think it's in the table of contents. So no kind of big upsetness from me or with wanting to dock them anything. Great kind of layout.
All right,
go to scores.
Final score. You want to start? What score did you give it, and kind of why do you think?
Okay, I gave it, and again, some of the best rule sets that we have had on this podcast are in the 80s, like that we've played. Nothing's pumped to 90, and like some of the die-hard rule sets, like Desert Island Game, like what would you take with you? And some of the top rule sets that we would take with us are like mid 80s. We try to be very objective as we can, even with the rule sets. We love deer, and so I just want to say that it's not like we went about this in a way. And when we originally talked with this template that we came up with, over a year ago, was 5 and 6 or greater is kind of like would recommend, would play. 80s are near and dear to our heart, and kind of like, are we ever going to find that perfect rule set that punches into the 90s? Don't know. We're still out there looking, and we'll probably review it, hopefully. My score, with that disclaimer up front, is a 7.5. So I think it's a great, slim rule book that gives you everything to be dangerous in the 50 pages, and that's with scenarios and a campaign system. A campaign system. I mean, that's crazy. The campaign and all of the action scenes are, you're looking at 31 to 50 pages, 20 pages of just this extra add-on stuff, which is just awesome. Sections build on each other. The QRS and the whole sections are on 1 to 2 pages. The scenes and the campaigns are phenomenal additions. My improves, which is a slight kind of ding, but I agree with Windhurst. It was done at par, around there is what I think. My improves would be the callback sections. For this game, for a type of skirmish game where a lot of stuff is interacting, or maybe some examples, some more examples, because it's got a handful of examples, but maybe some more examples of how a callback would work even laid out. I think it does that to some degree, but just you can't get everything, and you're definitely not going to get everything in the kitchen sink in 50 pages. You're going to get a really great laid out rule set. You're going to get, again, I think top-notch kind of product, but those would be like my only kind of dings on it. and then when, as you said, what you said earlier is, not discussing sometimes inches in there and about the measurements, or being a little bit more crystal clear would have been better. But I mean, no, that's a 7.5 for me on this, is a kind of a highly recommend, strong recommendation.
Yeah, I was a little bit more generous. I gave it a 9 overall on talking about just a book. I think
Nice.
it's a hearty, beautiful book that's got it pretty much has all the elements I want in a rule book as far as how it looks and how it functions. Now, some of those elements could be a little bit better or a little bit more often. But they even having clever additions that most rules don't, like the along the side of the page, the section for kind of quicker reference. I think it's a really good standard for how a rule book should look. And I mean, even to the point that, by the number, I've been critical of other rules because sometimes they have too much art that it detracts or it doesn't seem relevant. But for this, all the art is photos of minis. And to me, that's one of the best ways to go about it, because either reference pages or there's a few paid, stills, which is like, this is more just to fill space. But because they're photos of minis and not illustrations or something else, it really kind of is that inspiration. Like if I was to give this to my kids, they'd probably just enjoy looking through it. The biggest ding just for the book and how it's laid out is on the scenes. So the scenes are done in a style to look kind of like an old newspaper. And when I was looking through that, it kind of threw me off because it's kind of hard to see where one scene ends and one starts. Because I think on the same one, it's like this is one scene here and this is two scenes over here. And I understand it was an artistic choice. Like, hey, this is like the newspaper in the Daily Gazette. This happened in the town of Buckwheat, whatever. But when the rest of the book, the other 30 pages, is so beautiful, and then you have this kind of monochrome. I understand it was an artistic choice, but it kind of threw me off a little bit. That would be really my only ding. I mean, I'm not going to fault them for putting it in centimeters.
You heard it here at Great Escape Games. You could have had a 10 from Windhurst if you just would have fixed this. No.
Yeah. Or if you put the whole thing in inches, I'd be more willing to overlook. But I think as a book, if we're not talking about the mechanics, but just how it's laid out, I would be hard pressed to find someone who did a better job. Like we said, we're never going to find the perfect, but like this is the standard that I expect from an A-class company.
Yeah,
it was really good. So yeah.
No, I agree, and I think that's probably why I dinged some is, and maybe that's me dinging them from just being so concise. Is, you see other game systems in 150, 200 pages do a lot of hard work on it, and so 50 pages in my mind, I was just like, here's what I think is a strong recommendation, and nitpicking, what work goes into that. But it is a top-notch product. So moving on to that, we've scored it 7.5 and a 9. I'm going to write these down so I can make sure I have our final tallies for the listener/viewer. You have our next category, and again, we're sticking to every category that the 10 categories that we've reviewed every rule set on this podcast with. So what is the rule set trying to achieve? Again, this is coming as like a literary critic. You want to take the document or the novel or whatever you're reading on, what is its goal? Some rule sets they're trying to achieve logistics, as their priority, or cold steel. Maybe you're doing an American Revolutionary War set where it's like, okay, British had bayonets, and that means something in a charge. And so it's like, what is this rule set trying to achieve? Like, what is it putting the emphasis on? Is it mental? Is it, outgunned? What is it? And for me, what is the goal of the rule set? And I think it is a capital FUN, fun. Like, I think it's a flavorful Western cinematic feel is what it's going for. It is, a very fun skirmish game. That's at bottom. Like, I think that's what it's trying to achieve. What are your thoughts, Windhurst?
Yeah, I'd say it's going for. I added that it's going for a fun movie style. Like,
Yeah.
there's other rules that also do this where it's like we want the cinematic, like your game to feel like the movie you watched. And so for me, it's yeah, I agree. It wants a fun game, but fun's different for different people. So some people it's like I want a fun game might be more historically accurate, but that's not going to feel like the Wild West shootout movies because those aren't necessarily made to be realistic. And I think
My
they're
guy,
like,
it's Oregon Trail. My guy dies of
yeah,
dysentery.
and this feels like a rule set that was like we want to do. I mean, even their characters are meant, like the illustrations are meant to, you know, to resemble, you know, famous characters from history and film. And yeah, I think they're trying to go for that. Like this is meant to feel like a Wild West movie.
Yeah, 1000%. That's what I was saying. The cinematic feel of it, similar to kind of bolt action in World War II.
Yeah.
So the next kind of question in this category is who is the intended audience? And bottom line up front, everyone. I think old veterans of tabletop wargaming and brand new people will enjoy this game. I think you've seen there's some systems that have gone out there to try to get more people. Like Flames of War, kind of, I would say, taking out a lot of the complexity that people really loved. And to some degree, I think that's an implosion of that system. This one is, me and Windhurst talked about it a little bit before even coming on here. I think this is, I always look, I board game sometimes with people. It's every other month, something like that, with friends who don't know anything about tabletop wargaming. And if there was a game that I was going to try to show a transition to tabletop wargaming, this would probably be it. It's very intuitive. It's very easy to learn. And so I think it is targeted, with some of those people. And I think some of the veterans, and we'll get into this a little bit as we go through it, I think some of the veterans of the Wild West systems where building characters was huge, or, some nuances, detail in there about that, they'll be like, okay, well, this part is missing from this rule set, from this base rule set. And again, there's supplements and stuff we're going to talk about later as well. But I think it's everyone. I think it's this. A veteran wargamer can pick this up and still have fun, and I think a brand new person who's just learning tabletop wargaming will have fun too in a quick amount of time. What are your thoughts on that, Windhurst?
Yeah, generally, I agree with that statement. I think, like you said, if you're a veteran wargamer who has done Wild West games in the past, not necessarily what's out there right now. So, like, if you're coming from like the Legends of the Old West style games, and you're going straight into this, you're going to feel like it's missing stuff. Or if you're coming from very crunchy, very realistic games, you're probably going to have issues maybe a bit with like the weapon stats and how they're reflected. But I think if you're a veteran wargamer who's never done Wild West and you just like the Wild West, you're like, man, I really wish I could try a Wild West game. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll find it meets your needs to get models on the table and feel like you're doing a Wild West movie. Again, in my notes, I put it's for lovers of Wild West films and kind of that historical fiction. I think if you're somebody who is really into like Wild West history and what actually happened, you might be like, oh, well, that didn't actually, like, you might find issue with it. But it's for those who I think love the portrayal of Wild West in media, in film and movie, video games, and in books. If you are a fan of any of that, this is the type of rule set I think you'll really enjoy.
Yeah, I agree. So does it meet the goal, and kind of combining these last two questions in this section, and what shortfalls in the goal? I think it meets the goal in spades. I think it's, it definitely is fun. I had fun playing it. Me and Windhurst were actually talking about multiple Wild West rule sets, and some of the ones that we had discussed I'd owned or I was getting ready to probably look into. And when he picked this, I was like, oh man, that wasn't like at the top of my list. I'm glad he did. I am overall glad, that we kind of settled on this one, because it is pure fun. Like, you're not going to have a bad game in my mind. I played with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, 2 of my games. And they had fun as well, rolling dice and shooting me down like a dog in the dirt. So yeah, I think the shortfalls would be, just kind of harkening back to those other systems, Desperado, Legends of the Old West, any of those games, Fistful Lead, any of that stuff. The depth, some of the depth in Western games where they give you the RPG-ish feel, you can do that a little bit in here with building your band a little bit to the way you want to. It gives you the campaign system and lets you do that to a degree, to some degrees, a little bit further. But I think that that would be a little bit of a shortfall. But I think it capitalizes on the market, because I don't think, if you're playing a Wild West as kind of a beer and pretzels game, you're going to be all about that. And it could be to the exclusion of others. So I think they hit the nail on the head, even with those kind of missteps with RPG depth. And we'll talk about it again. I don't want to jump it out of the bag, but I think there's some work on by Great Escape Games and Dead Man's Hand on what the future is going to look like with the new supplements and those things. What about your thoughts on goal and shortfalls, Windhurst?
Yeah, so I completely agree on that. They kind of miss some of the RPG element, but I will caveat that with that element is for somebody who wants to immerse themselves in the Wild West game. I think what they have done, which is quite clever, and I would argue really meets the goal, if I said the goal is to do very cinematic, is they're releasing sets, like pre-made games, specifically based off groups from cinema. Even if there were totally fictional groups, like the John Wayne Cowboys movie with the kids, they've got a gang that is like John Wayne and the group of kids. Like, they're clearly, to me, the target is we want to recreate that cinematic feel. And so I think they're trying to give you that. So like, all right, you're not necessarily making your character with their backstory. You want to play as this iconic character and their posse. Here they are. And so it's, it's a different feel if that's what you're looking for. If that's what you're going for, you want to play that cinematic, your favorite movie, then this is probably a pretty good rule set for that. As far as like, and we'll talk about it for me a bit more in the mechanics. The mechanics, some of them kind of got in the way of that feel for me a little bit. We'll go in more depth, but my games weren't particularly lethal. I know Kentuckian had a different experience in some of his games. But I did play it with, I ran one game that was a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and myself. And they had a pretty good time, but there was a lot of shooting with nothing happening. And, they're not particularly aggressive because they're kids. And so a shootout across a corral where they're behind fences and I'm behind fences and, shooting back and forth without getting any closer for several turns didn't result in much. Now, that doesn't meet the feel for some movies, but there's like kind of spaghetti western, slightly more comical side where you're having this long drawn out shootout and nothing happens. I don't think the goal was to make a Blazing Saddles recreate, but yeah, there were some times where it was like, man, if this was a little bit more lethal, it'd feel like a more desperate gun battle than it was playing out for me. But we'll talk about it more in mechanics.
What's your score?
So this is where I gave it a bit low. For me, it was a 7, mostly because, as we'll talk about the mechanic side, and because we don't have the supplements, so the good supplement, which is out now, I don't have, and I think they're coming out with the bad supplement, and I don't have any of their pre-made gangs. So it was just making my own gangs for our games. I kind of missed that feel, and like I said, coming from the games I've come from, I want that. I'm more interested in playing my gangs and not necessarily representing the cinematic posse from history or from film. So I felt like I was missing out on that. I still think they did a good job, and that's why I still gave them a 7. Not something lower. That they if you're looking to represent the cinematic feel, they give you those tools, and I think they do that well. But that's not what I was looking for. So I gave it a 7 overall on this section.
We flopped. Yeah, I gave it an 8.8. I think it's pure fun. It misses a little bit of like RPG depth, but man, it is a quick and fun game for the veteran or beginner. I think you're going to be playing, like, kids can play this easily.
Yeah.
I think people are going to have fun. You're playing. I think sometimes I had games like within 20 minutes. Like the game is over, and there's a few of the acts that you're playing through. 1 versus 3. It's the starting scene and like. Fistful of Dollars or whatever it is, the Clint Eastwood movie. I think it's for a few dollars more. I can't remember which one it was, but there are, in my mind, perfect for fun. It definitely meets that intent. I think it overachieves in that goal, and I think for what is the majority. Like, my only kind of defense of them is the majority is going to be fun. I think me and Windhurst kind of like the RPG-ness of Westerns, of some of the rule sets we played in the past, but I'm trying to kind of step outside, and I think me and Windhurst are doing a good job of stepping outside our bias. And, who is going to be the main audience? And is it going to be people that, come up to the table that want that feel, or is it going to be people that's like, hey, I want to play the scene to Tombstone or Open Range in 20 minutes and 20 minutes to half an hour, and you're going to definitely be able to achieve that and have a lot of fun. So yeah. 8.8 for me. I'll kick it back to you.
I will caveat my score with I only played 1 or 2 of the scenes because of a lack of terrain, of respectable terrain for it. But having looked through the scenes, I think the scenes are set up to get you into the action and much more lethal action a lot faster. Several of my games that were so drawn out were kind of what you might think of more of a meeting engagement style, where you're kind of moving into contact and you're tending to hunker down at kind of like long range and fire at each other. And the rules because they're not made to be necessarily a historical representation of everything, that's not where they shine. I think when we got situations where guys were at, drawing distance, shootout distance, like you see in cinematics, like that really, that scene in Tombstone where they roll up on the guys and they're basically at point blank range, it's going to be just as lethal as that.
And OK Corral.
Yes. And so I think that's a very important note, that you need to play your games with that in mind and not go into the, okay, well, this is my posse versus your posse in this made-up scenario where it's like, hey, we're moving in to try and run you out of town. If you set your game up with, like, at the point of action, I feel like that's where the rules really shine. And because I didn't do that as often, it really reflected. So I think take that away from our 2 different scores. Because I think you did... How many of the scenes did you actually play through?
At least 6 or 8.
Yeah, and so I think that really is telling. So moving on then to, where are we at? Mechanics and nuances. Is that right? No, gatekeeping. Sorry, gatekeeping. So in gatekeeping, we're talking about what kind of things make it harder to get into this game. Is it expensive? Are there people playing it? Things like that. So first looking at what mechanics help or hurt. Special dice, tokens, and stuff. It does use tokens. They're kind of generic tokens. You could use tokens from a lot of different companies, I feel like, and represent what you want. It does use its own set of cards, and mine are not easy reach. But I will say the cards is a little bit of an issue as far as gatekeeping, because as you can see on Kentucky on Screen, if you're watching this, it's got all the text on them for what they do. Those are written out in the rules. They have them all, but if you don't have the cards from Great Escape games with them on the card, you're going to do a lot of referencing back and forth of what the cards do. And so any game that has its own bespoke cards, that's going to be an issue in as far as gatekeeping, because you need to buy the rules, and ideally for ease of play, you need to buy the cards from the company. I don't think Great Escape Games is going anywhere soon. And we'll talk about like support, like they're still really heavily supporting this. in other rule sets we've talked about that are a bit older, going around and finding those cards can be quite challenging. And some of those rules, if you can't get the cards, you're just SOL. But I think because they do have everything in the rules, you could get by if you can't get your hands on those cards and you want to just use regular playing cards. It's just not as efficient, so they do kind of get around that issue. And like I said, the tokens are pretty generic. What did you feel about mechanics, any kind of gatekeeping mechanics-wise?
No, I think the rule set, normally you buy the deal where I think it comes with the cards and it comes with the kind of, I have one here that I punched out recently when I bought that second one. I just want to have more tokens and stuff. And it comes with the cards and the rule set. I totally agree with you. I think the rule set in the company is super healthy. That they've got a lot of stuff in the hopper. It looks like for supplements. So I don't think that will be an issue. And we played one of the earlier games I played. The person that I played with didn't have the new cards, and we kind of went through both of the rule books. And again, I agree with Great Escape Games. It's like it is not a complete rewrite. It is a refreshing, a little bit of mechanics and stuff like that, but I think you can get by. The D20s and D10s, nothing kind of crazy new there. The measuring stick that comes with it, really easy to use. But again, like you said, I think if worse, and we shouldn't really be even talking worst case scenario, but like 2 decades, a few decades from now, I still think like you'll be able to get by with the rule set itself. As far as I'll hold this to, I know some other questions are coming up, but no kind of gatekeeping with the mechanics that help or hurt players or the tokens and cards. Nothing crazy and nothing out of the ordinary. The rule book itself that comes with those things, pretty cheap. So definitely kind of top marks in these first few questions for me.
Yeah.
But I'll kick it back to you for the next one.
Yeah. So it is a D20 and a D10 game, which is kind of non-standard, I think, for a lot of people. But you could get by with one D20 and one D10 if you really needed to. And so I think if you've never played a game and have never had a D20 for any reason, because it's not any of the games you play, you don't need a bespoke dice, and they're not expensive. So I think keeping the dice count so low makes it very easy, because most wargamers or gamers are probably going to have a D20. You might need to get a D10, but again, if you've ever played any kind of role-playing game with a standard set of role-playing dice, which is like one of each of the type of dice, you're already good to go. You've got all the dice you need. So I think one other thing, kind of mechanics, the roster, it took me a little bit to find a downloadable roster online. It's not very clear on their website where you can get one. I had to basically Google it, and then a Google link took me to Great Escapes Games website where I could download the roster. And so, if you have to that's another downside, not having a PDF. It's like, okay, well, I need the roster. I need to fill out. Not everyone always has access to a scanner. I feel like we don't scan as much as we used to. So if you don't have the ability to easily print that can be frustrating. But yeah, as far as mechanics, the next section, part of this section, I'm just kind of group it all up because they're all similar. So cost of models, size of models, and the manufacturer can use other models. It's a skirmish game, and in my first game, we played with 3 models aside. It was two of us playing, and we just had 3 models, which was fine for a game. 28 mil models in westerns I've been seeing in dollars anyway run from anywhere from $2 to $6, maybe $8 for some companies, if depending on the material it's made out of. And then Great Escape Games has a box set of plastic Wild West models. I don't have the price written down, but
it's around 20 to, it's only I think 10 models, but it's around 25.
Yeah,
somewhere
so
in there.
about $2 a model, and and they're plastic, so you can customize them how you want. They come with little extra bits. So I think price-wise on the models is really good as far as getting into a game if you've never done Wild West. It is geared to 28 millimeter. You could probably play it at 25 without changing anything. I think if you're going to play it at 20 millimeter, you might want to adjust the distances a little bit. It does recommend 25 millimeter bases. and some measurement is done base to base. Yeah, they recommend 25 millimeter round bases, and they're in the rules. It says 5 to 10 models, and that's not necessarily per side. That could be total in the game. And there's a lot of companies out there. I mean, my collection is probably from 4 different companies for Wild West. The one thing I will say that's kind of gatekeeping is the terrain. The scenarios require a lot. So almost all of the scenarios and the games are set in a Wild West themed town. And, you know, if you're any kind of wargamer, you're probably going to want a decent looking town set up, and that's going to be kind of quite a few buildings. Now, I'm sure Kentucky has a lot of different options he can talk about, but I can see that being a problem, and that was, like, for me, that was a problem. I didn't necessarily want to buy a whole bunch of Wild West town buildings, so I used a lot of my, like, log cabin from, like, Black Powder, French Indian War, which still work great. They're very thematic, you know, doing like a ranch style or, you know, Colorado mountains or something. But yeah, it does anticipate a lot of terrain on the table, and that can be where the dollar kind of comes and bites you. What are your thoughts, Kentuckian?
Custom models, I agree with you. I think, like, with their plastic sets, which are solid, I showed like a little.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And to give you the customization to do whatever you want to do, they have females, males. They just launched a mounted Kickstarter that I backed. It's they make great stuff. I've been a big Great Escape fan, Great Escape Games fan for a long time. Stuart and them at that company, solid people, do a lot of good stuff. So $25, $30 for most boxes or gang boxes, even if you buy aftermarket. I think Knuckle Duster is some of the more expensive ones on the model. I mean, they're beautiful models. They're like $27 for 6. That's probably on the high end.
Black Scorpion, I think, is like $8 a model.
That's crazy. That's crazy.
I think it's like 8 for maybe 1 or 2 models, but yeah, some of theirs are pretty expensive.
Well, and you got a bunch of different companies. I think with you know, a good kind of segue here is I had a buddy who's 3D printed me. He 3D printed me a drunk guy with a pistol at the bar that's gotten a little too rowdy. You know, obviously cents on the dollar for some of the stuff. So in my mind, I don't think any of that is real gatekeeping. I think it's kind of you know, whatever you want to make it. It's a smorgasbord of great stuff. And then I think one thing that Great Escape Games has done really well is their starter set. The starter set comes with 3 of their plastic buildings, amazing buildings, solid, really tight, compact. So storage is great, kind of very realistic. The wood grain on the panels and stuff. A lot of people have done reviews of their buildings. Go check those out, as well as the plastic models. I think they are top notch. And in that starter box, you're looking at around $120. The rules, the cards, everything. You know, you get I think 5 or 10 models of guys and gals is what I got in mine. More than that, probably a bunch of extra add-ons, the baggage and all that stuff. You can play a majority of the rule book with their starter set, and majority of the scenes and scenarios with their starter set. Most starter sets you see are around $100, give or take a few dollars, you know, 150 somewhere in there, and it gives you a taste in my mind. And there's some of the starter sets that you see that, like what Warlord has done with Bolt Action, is it's a very learning game that you would never really play as a standard point game that you get with their starter sets. This one, I think if you buy the Great Escape Games starter set, you have you're at high 80s, 90% product. You really wouldn't need a lot else to have fun. And so I think that's an awesome kind of entry part to that. But again, 3D printing them, buying the rulebook, 3D printing 2 to 3 buildings and 5 to 10 models, you know, $20, $50, I don't know, with all that, you'd be off to the races. You would be able to play 90%. So I don't think a lot of gatekeeping in this. And then the specific size, if you talked about that with the manufacturers and models, I will say Knuckle Duster is one of the kind of premier, I think, Western models out there here in the US of A. I think they're premier. I mean, the guy, Doc Holliday, looks like Val Kilmer. You can't see that, but you know, it's an amazing mini with the shotgun and everything. They're great models and everything. They're big. You know, they're the heroic scale 28s and stuff now. I think Great Escape Games, a lot of their models, they blend well with my old Foundry models that I've had for decades, that I've played Desperado and everything with, and then they're still not out of place with the Knuckle Duster stuff. So I think Great Escape Games is kind of dead center in the middle of the road that you can mix and match a little bit with. So, yeah, I think they pair nicely with the old and the new stuff. And again, the game's not gatekeeping as far as, like, I agree Windhurst what he said about bases. It's 25mm rounds is kind of standard for skirmish games, so nothing crazy there. And nothing wild is like you have to have this type of base, you have to have this type of you know, whatever it is model. There's a lot of creativity you can do, and it just goes with their plastic sets of, you know, how you want to arm the model, how you want to, you know, put the model in your gang. So top marks for me on the starter set and kind of the lack of gatekeeping and stuff that they do. I think it's probably one of the industry leaders in the starter set, which, you know, may not be a great thing. Most companies are trying to wet your whistle to get you hooked, and I think you've got everything you need in that starter set for a majority of this rule book. So I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, so the final bit under gatekeeping, and we have a more dedicated section kind of this, but it's book supplements and new editions. So as far as gatekeeping is concerned, we're just concerned with, are they not updating the game, or are they coming out with so many supplements and so many new editions that, you know, it's like every year there's a new edition, like the big enemy in the room sci-fi rule set that I don't see how people keep playing, because it's like every year they break whatever it is you're playing. So as I said early on, you know, we're coming at this at the Dead Man Hands Redux version. So I think they did a second edition, and then this is the Redux after the second. Is that correct?
Well, no, I think it's only one, and then this is my understanding. Okay, I'm not entirely clear on that. I think it's 2013. I think there were some add-ons. What I do know that they've done is there were a bunch of different supplements that came out that were like new rules and new additions to the game. They had one that was in Australia, like a Down Under supplement that added new factions and kind of new rules as well. And then they had one with the undead. I cannot remember the name of that supplement, but if you go on Great Escape's website, it's how they have all the zombie, like, cowboys and stuff. They did one. It was around the time of, like, when Dracula's America was coming out, and there were some other kind of Wild West undead games that were taking over there. And but I do know you can find those on eBay. I don't think you can still find them on Great Escape's site anymore, but you can find them on eBay and kind of off-brand places. But yeah, from my understanding, and again, correct us if we're wrong here, 2013 was kind of initial release, and then I think they had some supplement books and those things, but again, the Redux is the new edition.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that's not a time frame. I think that's, you know, we've talked about this in other rules reviews about how often a second edition or edition could come out. I think that time frame is very reasonable.
Decade's pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, even if they did a second edition and then a Redux to kind of bring everything together, I still wouldn't put that as too much in, you know, 10 years. So as far as gatekeeping is concerned, I don't think there's any issues with their supplement release schedule or the rules release schedule. I think it's on point. Any final thoughts on that, Kentuckian?
No, I think it's not in danger of becoming like what Fantasy Flight was to X-Wing, where you had to buy these new cards and it was kind of towards tournament play. I think you're going to see a lot of the new supplements like Windhurst was talking about with the good, the bad, and some other things that kind of pick apart, you know, Plains War. Who knows where they'll go with all of this stuff. They have the Buffalo Soldiers already. But I think it's going to be good because, again, it's a system that's designed for pure fun and to give you the feel. And so I think it's a way that they're getting after more depth onto the bolts, you know, the bolt-on stuff to their basic mechanics. And so I think it's perfect. I think the rule book alone, without buying any of the supplements, is well worth it. Easy to get into, not gatekeeping, and you can play with the models you have, 3D print you some models, and you're going to have a great time. So, right, what would you score it?
You first. In my section, you got to give me your score first.
I will go 8.5 because I think it's easy. It is super easy to get into. And then the only reason why I'm putting it pretty high in gatekeeping is because I think a lot of this stuff is readily available out there. and they're very, it's not prescriptive about you have to play with these models, you have to play with this type of stuff. And then I think what pushes me over the edge is their starter set is well priced at $120 around there, and gives you, you can play a lot of different facets in the rule book. Like you probably could play. There's some scenarios with this, a terrain and those things. Obviously, you can't play with that terrain. But I mean, like you are there. Like you can do a campaign. You can do some deep, the depths of this 50-page rule book with the starter box alone, the 2-player starter box. So that pushes me up over the edge to where I think, again, 7, 8 really good scores for me. 9's pushing it, and I'm pretty close to that 8.5 on easy to get into.
Yeah, I'm right around there with you. I gave it an 8. I'm always going in these scores, these deep dives. I always ding a point on gatekeeping if you have bespoke anything, bespoke cards, bespoke dice. Just because I have seen it hurt rule sets when it's like in the future. Because some rule sets, I think when you make a set of rules, you should always be trying the idea of timeless. The rules to me should survive long after your company. That to me is a real test if this is a good set of rules. If your company's long gone, but people are still playing your set of rules, then I think you've found that perfect formula. And something that can always make that more difficult is bespoke stuff. Now, I might have dinged them more if they didn't have it in the rules for the cards written out. I think if if one of my great grandchildren digs this out of the box that my kids will probably put all my hobby stuff in, hopefully not.
Indiana Jones is going to find it in your tomb.
They could totally play the game with just this and a regular deck of cards and whatever models they could find. The other point I dinged it for was kind of the terrain. So like we talked about earlier, the kind of, if you really want to get the most out of the rules, you need to be dropping in right in the heart of the action, in the middle of town or in the middle of the saloon. And to me, because the type of war gamer I am, 3 buildings isn't enough to give me that proper feel. I need more than that.
You can do it. A majority of you, though, can do it.
You can do it.
Windhurst are crazy. We're crazy.
Yeah.
You guys can do it.
I'm not saying you can't do it, but even in their photos, like the amount of terrain they show in their photos, if you're like trying to recreate that,
beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah.
To me, that could be intimidating for somebody getting in. If this was their first role game, like, wow, I only need 5 or 10 models, and then they're looking at all the buildings and everything. It's like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of buildings. And buildings aren't necessarily cheap if you don't have access to 3D printers or people who can 3D print. So I would say that has the potential to be an issue. But still, I give it an 8 because I think those are small things that don't stop the game from happening. So Kentucky, you want to take the next?
Yeah, so playability, I'm going to talk a lot about the questions up front, and we're going to talk probably more about experiences and stuff with playability. So a couple of the kind of leading questions are, how long before you have the system? 1 to 2 turns, 1 to 2 games. Can you finish the game in 1 to 2 hours, a day, a weekend? Long setup, tear down, putting models out on the table. Does the result normally fit the game or desired achievement? And so those are kind of like guiding us with playability is, what does that look like? I think it's top notch. This is going to be a high score for me. How long before you have the system? I think 1 to 2 turns, maybe. And to give you an idea from that, the way that they do the scenarios in the back of the book is they build on each other. And so that kind of goes to the campaign. So the first scenario, there's one that everybody kind of plays that's reviewing the game online. And it's the good, the lead, and the ugly. And it's kind of the opening scene of that Clint Eastwood movie or any movie where the stranger, the drifter, comes in, who's our hero, our tragic hero. And, 3 drunk guys are kind of getting after him. It's 1 on 3. It's an easy system that shows you, and the scenarios are pitched in a way to where you're going to learn. Like the scenarios allow you to go through a boot camp. But I played that scenario, that initial one, probably like 5 times. And I played it several times back and forth with another player where we just changed sides. Like, hey, what could be done differently? And you have that with these games. It's 20 minutes. And for a lot of these, I would say it looks a lot prettier if you have the town and stuff and you're walking down the dirt streets, but you still don't, I think you can get by 1 or 2 buildings, 3D print them, you'll be fine. 1 to 3 buildings, you're fine. But I think 1 to 2 turns, you have it. And then you're talking about, man, you could play a handful of games in an hour and a half. And, by then you're like, oh gosh, this is easy. And we even went into, I did not play, still kind of new to the rules. We were on a quick turn we wanted to dive into this, make sure that we got the games played. And I really was going to try to get to a campaign because a friend, Scott Anderson, there in Nashville, is one that had gamed it a while ago, and he had beautiful terrain and the models out. And I said, hey, I'm trying to learn the system. Would you care to walk me through it? And make sure that I'm not misguided in my initial approach. And I mean, like, we played 2 or 3 scenarios. They built on each other. It was a lot of fun. It was a blast. And he hadn't played the rules in years, he had said. And he picked them up just like that. And I could just see it's like riding a bike where it is so simple. So huge kind of marks for me on that. You can easily finish the game, several games within an hour. And the campaign, as I talked more with Scott about it, like, I mean, they play that not just in a weekend, but you can play it in like a long day. You're going through a dozen scenarios real quick that impact each other, that give you that feel of you're playing that 2-hour Western movie out on the tabletop. Just, that's awesome. Long setup and tear down. I played some ranch style games like Windhurst. You're talking 1 building, a corral, a handful of models on each side or less. 30 minutes tear down and set up together in my mind. So you can't beat that. You can't beat that. You can't beat the time on the duration on the games. And all of my games, even the initial, most of us, even though if we come to learn a rule set or love a rule set, those first few games can be quite painful. And especially if you're not well read before kind of stepping into the wild blue yonder of the Old West here. And even though I felt pretty well read before I went into the game with Scott, it was just super easy. And even doing, I played 1 or 2 solo games here at my house, and it was super easy just to get it and kind of get immersed. And even when you're like, okay, maybe this is just a misunderstanding by me or a clunkiness, like, I don't think you can beat, the playability of it. I have high marks on, the time, the duration, the long tear down and setup. The only kind of knock I have, and then I want to hear Windhurst's ideas, and I'm kind of making a kind of simulation of all my games here, is does the result normally fit the game or desired, achievement, what you're trying to get out of that cinematic feel? I would say it does, but luck has a lot to do in this game. And that's painful sometimes for some people. There's some games that me and Windhurst have played from different authors who, luck can have to do with a deviation in how you roll for movement. And that can be painful when you're trying to do strategy. Now, if you're coming into a Wild West game, you have a little bit more of a, hey, this is the Wild West. People can trip, cards can get drawn, that can happen. But when, cards and your activations happen in a certain order, that can definitely, I don't think there was any game where I saw a player or myself was totally railroaded, because I think to Windhurst's point, talking to earlier to where it becomes a shootout, is the players are somewhat survivable. And if you're talking to 2 to 3 models on a table to last a half hour or longer, you're going to need some survivability. Nobody wants to come out there and we're the first scene in The Quick and the Dead, and my person comes up and Windhurst's person comes up and he's like, all right, you're going to be pushing daisy soon. And bam, within 10 seconds, I got a bullet in between my eyes. We're not doing a showdown. It's normally a gunfight that happens, with a little bit of terrain or something variable in there. So there's some survivability to that. An example of that would be, I won the first scenario when I played Ben in Nashville. And so in the second scenario, it allowed me to place, the models where I wanted to on the table, and he got a place first. And so he placed 2 of his individuals in an alleyway. and one of his individuals kind of had a shotgun, and so he's kind of trying to arm it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to dogpile the shotgun. And I was able to place 2 teams kind of on each side of the alley, right? And you're getting in the cinematic feel of, hey, we've just cornered the good guy in the alley, and we've got 2, curmudgeons up front and 2 in the back. And although it was a definite bloodbath, he was able to shoot his way to get a figure to escape from that, even though the other one died, and or was out of action, however you want to call it. But it had really good feel to it in that sense, and that gave you some complexity there, even with the scenarios that weren't just point and click with hey, they have to be set up at this quadrant. You were allowed some maneuver, and that even helped, I think, making dynamic and diverse scenarios. I don't want to drown on here, and we can go back and forth, I think, with more examples. So I'll kick it over to Windhurst to hear his thoughts on, what he thought about playability, the long setup, how long before you felt you had the game. I thought I had it after the first time I played, even solo. But what are your thoughts about that, Windhurst?
Yeah, so I had a fairly different experience. I still scored it, I think you'll find, fairly high, but it took me about 2 games, specifically with the kind of getting really comfortable with the shooting chart. I felt like it took about 2 games before I was fairly comfortable, like, okay, I'm pretty sure just off the top of my head, I'm comfortable with what all the modifiers are. But there was a lot of, all right, does this one apply? 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 Like that for me took a little while. And then with the cards, when to inject the cards, sometimes it isn't exactly clear. So we'll talk in kind of mechanics a little bit, but a lot of things have to be done at the very beginning of an action or of a turn. And so it's like, I declare I do these things, and that's when you do a card. And it's like, oh, wait, well, do I do it now or do I do it after they've done, like sometimes it when's the right time was a little less clear. I think what was really telling for my experience is that I found out how this game is not meant to be played. And that is how my first couple games were run. And so that's the setting up a table and kind of doing a meeting engagement, where it's kind of like moving in from the edge of the table. That's not how this game is meant to be played. You need to have a narrative kind of in mind, and you need, like, even just looking through the scenarios, I don't think any of them start with models more than about 16 inches apart. Like, they're all going to start within 2 feet of each other. And that really lends to that it's going to be a fast-paced game. So if you're trying to play it like a traditional war game, like if you don't even look at the scenarios and it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to throw some models on the table and we're going to see what happens, it's going to be a long game. You're looking at 6 turns in 3 to 4 hours. It's not going to be very lethal because you're probably going to get to shooting range and sit there and shoot it out, and you're using like old style revolvers and stuff, and you're not going to hit much. And like Kentucky said, there's a lot of luck because it uses a D20, and I'll get more in my thoughts on this on mechanics, but that can be very swingy, especially with the way the modifiers go in, that it can seem like not much is happening. Setup, my game setups were very light because I was doing mostly kind of corral, small village-ish look, farmstead look, as opposed to a town. I think if you're going with a big proper town setup, especially if you're trying to emulate what the rules have, even if you're doing it on a 3x3 play area, that can be a bit of a time sink. Setting up a lot of buildings and stuff can be a bit of a time sink, more than some games. My games, the setup and stuff wasn't very long, but the play was long because I don't think we were playing it the way it's really designed to be played.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, and so I think I'm glad I did it that way, because now I can tell you this is not how the game is meant to be played.
Yeah, no, it was a good Windhurst bore the brunt of that. But again, I think that goes back to what we had talked about. So me and Windhurst play a bunch of other skirmish games where, you are moving from board edge to board edge, and some of the movement is kind of in the tactical approach to it. With this Western, you're the opening scene is closing. Like the music has just cut by the time the dice are about to drop, because a bullet is about to go flying in somebody's direction, and it makes for a very dynamic game. And I think a lot of that happens, like the movement to Windhurst's point, is in the setup of where you're going to put your models. Like you said, like there's restrictions on, you have to place them here. They have to be in a building. They have to be within 20 inches of this, or they can't be within 20 inches of each other. And so that is how that scene is kind of playing out. And then as soon as kind of dice drop, it's okay. Somebody is probably doing a shot or some quick movements to get into to set up.
Yeah. So I will say then, the rules don't really have a way to set up just a straight up generic game. And that's why I say that's not how the game's meant to be played. There is no generic set train up this way, deploy this way. It's per scene. And so if you're like, man, I don't have the right stuff, or I don't want to play any of these scenes, you don't have to, but I highly recommend, if you want to get the most out of this game and really enjoy it, you need to then think of a game that is set up like these scenes are. So using whatever it is you have, and that was my mistake. And it was not taking out all the maneuver into position portion of the game and then the gunfight starting. It's the placing of the models, like alternating, or coming up with your own way. How are we going to deploy in action, and then go from there. I mean, and you could even use their own card mechanics, initiative, to be like how you're deploying in action, and just set yourself a zone in the center of the table at the base of the erratum.
Well, and I would say that that's a way to play it. I think that's outside the four corners of the book. So I think that's adding even more to the book.
Yeah. And
I think it is as a way for us to learn the rule set, or as you said, as you were trying to like get the feel of it. I think it added to the fact on why they have, and again, the scenes aren't totally doctrinal in these things. Like the good, the lead, and the ugly one is you're walking down a street. Like it doesn't one building, two, it doesn't matter. You're engaging with these two or three. It says kind of drunk guys who are just trying to give you a hard time, and it's about to lead to a gunfight. So I think that takes that out of it. I think Windhurst kind of ran into exactly what he said. Like it was a good example of if you are going to play additional scenarios or things like that, it will require initial thought. But I think the scenarios, the way it has it laid out in the book, are perfect. Not as don't think of like a 10 building Western town is what you need. Like when I played the first scenarios that I did, I think I had 1 to 3 buildings on the table. And I've set up my Adobe town that's behind me on my 6x4, and I really only used like 4 foot by 4 foot or 2 foot by 2 foot sections sometimes when I was playing these initial games. So it's a good learning experience, I think, as well.
I think my big takeaway for playability is you can't roll into this game like you would most skirmish games or other games thinking, okay, I've read the rules, I'm not going to get into the scenarios yet, I just want to set up a game and see how it works. You don't do that with this set of rules. Like Kentuckian said, the scenarios are meant to kind of build on themselves and help teach you the game. If you just if you just roll into it like I did, you're not getting the proper experience of the game. So I am telling you from my experience, I did it so you don't have to. But yeah, and you could argue that's a shortfall of the game because, a lot of experienced wargamers might be like, oh, okay, I don't need the scenarios. I understand the rules. Let me just try and play a game. And so that's just something to be aware of. It's not going to work for you. But yeah, so scores, that's all my thoughts on it.
My only kind of last thought of that is I think it gives you my last little pitch on why playability is good. And even though I hate a lot of systems that generate artificial friction, that are, if you're talking about a scenario driven game, that are artificial in how they create friction and total happenstance, and when it compounds on each other for like movement and then shooting and those things, I think initiative is huge. You know, it's dead man's hand is the name of the game. You know, sometimes you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. And I think there are, with the interruption cards and the duck card, you know, the being able to duck and do those things, like even if you're in a scenario, and the last game I played, like I really tried to break this and put somebody in a pinch. And with using, you know, the cards that are in your hand that you can play as you're going through the game, you know, that can stop people or trump, you know, something, and interrupt an action, stumble, the stumble card. Like, you're never out of the fight. And, you know, it goes back to that scene with Ben in the alley. Like, I thought I had Ben, like, cornered, and he got a pretty high, he weathered, you know, my first initial ambush shots, and then he got a pretty high card to be able to get out of dodge there. And so cards and luck are part of the West, you know, like having that. And so to me, it's not a painful experience of like, there's some game systems where I'm like, hey, let's just not even worry about setting up the models. Just roll high die wins, right? Like if you're going to play luck, like might as well do it that way. This is, you're never out of the fight. You're always kind of in it, even if you're on a back foot. There's ways to use the cards effectively to climb out of a hole. So super great playability. The narrative, stories and the scenes and the acts, love how they're done. The boot camp of it shows you really how that works, and I think it's done well. And so it'll get you into the thick of it to teach you, I think, the basic mechanics. So I started this one, so I kick it to you for scores.
I gave it an 8, despite my not playing it as intended. I still scored it quite high because I don't fault the rules for that. The only reason I might not have scored it higher is because I don't feel like the rules made that clear that you shouldn't do that. It was kind of like I had to learn the hard way that wasn't the right way. I think
and most other, to your point, most other rule sets you can do that in.
Exactly. Like most you can just roll in, and maybe it's not exactly, but this one is like it really doesn't feel right doing that. And
yeah,
I think they could have included a section on, and I'm not saying they should change the rules to accommodate playing that way, but making it clear that, hey, we really recommend you do it this way. This is how the game's intended. If you try it this way, you're not getting the right experience. Kind of disclaimer would avoid that, because I think the risk, and this could go into gatekeeping a little bit, is if I were to pick these rules up with no other game experience and then be like, okay, well, I just want to set up a game and try and see how I understand the rules, I'm not going to get the right experience out of the game, and I'll be like, man, this is not as much fun. And that could hurt someone's idea of going back into it. So making it clear in the rules, like, hey, we really recommend you play through the scenes and you play through them in this order, and this is why, would help, I think, alleviate that risk.
Bottom line up front, play the acts and scenes.
Yes.
I think it's a teaching moment.
Yeah.
My score, 9.5. Highest I think I've ever given on.
You froze up on me. You there?
Yeah.
Right. Start 9.5. Highest you've ever given.
9.5. I think it's the highest I've ever given. It's amazing playability. It is unmatched in tabletop wargaming. I think I have seen games have practice scenarios in them and kind of like a boot camp in it. To have a boot camp that sits and fits the scenes that you see in these spaghetti western movies play out and gives you the teaching points of in the bar fight. You know, it starts, one of the earlier scenarios is a bar fight. You start, you know, with getting ready to fight somebody over a issue in a bar, a comment or something, or looking for somebody, I believe is what the scenario says. And then going out to a High Plains drifter, kind of wandering into town and getting roughed up by 3 drunks. Like, this is every Western movie playing out in a way that teaches you the game. The fun nature of it, the ability to have a handful of games in an hour, a little over an hour, is awesome. It is a quick and dirty cinematic. You will come alive in the Western movies on the tabletop. The cards, the interruption scenario, like nothing's new. Like a lot of Western games use cards, use interruptions and stuff. But I think it does it to a really great extent to have it streamlined. And I think, you know, all the I think early comments I said about, well, hey, it's not, it doesn't have some depth that I've liked in the past. This is where it shines in the playability. This is where the lack of some of the nuances of the RPG-ness feel of other Western games, I would have rated it lower in playability if it would have had that. This is quick, dirty, pick the faction, pick the 2 or 3 models, play the models that it says in the scenario, like, hey, you can only have 3 guys with reputation of 2, and then, the one guy is the drifter who's like a boss, That is awesome, great teaching stuff, love it, can't say enough about it. So 9.5 for me, high marks. And I'll kick it back to you for the next section.
Yeah, so rules, mechanics, and nuance. It's probably the section we usually have the most to say about a set of rules. We've kind of hit on some of it. So we're going to look at, is it simple, complex? Is it pages of charts or 1 to 7 modifiers? Is it crunchy? And then kind of any game-changing mechanics, or where the rules break down, how they generate friction. So I felt it's a simple game. I think we've talked about that quite a lot, that it's simple in the sense that it's easy to pick up. I think talking about game-changing mechanics is the card system. A lot of games, like Kentucky just said, use cards. A lot of Western games specifically use, poker-style cards. I think what they have done by having these kind of special abilities on the cards allows us to add that complexity. So the first couple games I played, we didn't use the in-hand cards. We just did the initiative cards. That's when I was playing with the kids, because it was just, for someone so young to kind of keep track of, because there's a lot of, relatively speaking, a lot of text compared to some other games I played where it's like, oh, this card just gives you plus whatever on your shoot. It was a bit much for, under 10s to keep track of. And the game played fine without it. And it was very simple. And I think then if you want to add that level of complexity, using the cards in hands to interrupt and to add those modifiers and stuff, gives you that more complexity to kind of help with the, like Kentucky was saying, with the luck factor. Because I think the D20 mechanic is, for me, where one of the kind of, it breaks down a little bit, because the D20 is, I don't know, it's such a wide range that it really is about luck. Talking about modifiers, I think there's, in shooting
11.
Alone, there's 12
11.
potential. If you also count the weapon modifier and distance modifier.
Okay. Well, and then you could say the individual himself, who will have sometimes pluses and minuses.
Yeah. So you can have potentially, as I calculated, a max potential of 12 different modifiers. That's still not charts and charts, and that's not bad. But for me, that was the most crunchy part, was going down my list of, okay, what are all my modifiers that apply under this shot?
Am I under fire? Have I aimed?
Have I moved? Yeah. How much have they moved? What kind of cover? Is that the boss I'm shooting at? And you can shoot up to 3 times with a pistol, and you get 3 actions. And I will say, one of the mechanics they do is you get 3 actions, and you have to declare all of them in the beginning. And that was a little... I liked that. Some of the factors, the modifiers, it doesn't matter what order you do it in. So if you're saying I'm going to shoot and move twice, well, that move penalty goes onto your shot, even if it's at the beginning of your sequence.
I don't think that ever came up in my games.
There were times where it's like, I'm going to, because you have to move twice for it to be a factor. Yeah. But yeah, if it was like, I'm going to shoot and then move twice to get out of the way, you're still going to get that minus for the double move. And
I'll go back and look at that.
Yeah, and so there's times where it was like if you're shooting twice, right, the second shot, it doesn't matter the order. All the factors kind of fall in at the same time. I like, though, that, hey, you get 3 actions and you declare all the actions in the beginning. It is kind of a no pre-measurement game. I think your rules as written, you're given 1 free measurement at the beginning of the turn, which, in my experience, even playing with kids, worked out fine, because we had the furthest range, we when I was playing with the kids, we all had just pistols, and the max range is 12 inches, or I think, yeah. And so, you just take a ruler and like, okay, here's my one free measure. I'm just going to measure what's within 12 inches, and then I've got to figure out after that, kind of a ballpark. I know how far my gun shoots, and that felt fine. But yeah, for me, the big mechanic was the cards, and kind of like Kentuckian said, a lot of games use cards. They don't really do anything new, other than you get one card face up and all the other cards go down. A lot of other games, it's like, okay, maybe all the cards are in hand, or we draw at every action we draw, and then whoever got the high card goes first until all your guys have gone. Kind of what were your thoughts on all of those, Kentuckian?
I agree with you. I think it was super simple. The way that I broke down, I still think 10, 11, 12 modifiers in there is not bad.
No,
it's
not
five
bad.
or six. It's 5 or 6 for the shooter and like 5 or 6 for the target. And so in my mind, it was pretty simple to look through and like count on one hand, like, did I move? Did I aim? Where, did I do 2 movements? Did I aim? What's going on there? Am I under fire? And then the target, is he behind, is he obscured, or what's going on with him? It was pretty quick, simple to go through. And I think that is the only thing that is like crunchy at all. And 12 modifiers is nothing in the grand scheme of it. I agree with the D20. It can be kind of swingy. There were a few times where I had pretty short range shots with shotguns, or anything else like that, and you roll that 3 or that 2 and you're like, oh my gosh, or you rolled a 1 and you're out of ammo and you're like, geez. So it was fun. It didn't, you're in the middle of the firefight, and normally you're having 2 or 3 people kind of with you, and by the time you break your nerve test or something going towards the end, it's not a huge issue. And so kind of just to walk through that again, it's a deep dive in the rules mechanics, right? You have your posse, your gang, your faction, both the opposing sides. You're using their deck, and so there's 4 suits, right? And so there's kind of 4 basic factions in the games: Desperado, Cowboys, Lawmen, and whatever the other one is. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Cowboys. And so you're using that, and so you're removing the face cards. If you're, black and your Desperados or something, your spades or whatever it is, you're moving the face cards of the clubs, but then you're using their commons, because the commons are something as simple as like stumble or, whatever it is, to fall through. And then you're going against cards and people with that. And the player who's the lawmen or whatever, hearts or whatever it is, like they remove the face cards of the diamonds, and then they kind of roll on into it. It really gives you a separate layer of moving and shooting. It keeps both players engaged. I agree with you. I don't think anything's groundbreaking about the system. And, there's something, we've talked, the bolt action order dice mechanic are in Two Fat Lardies, a Chain of Command, the patrol phase, Clash of Spears kind of did that maneuver phase early in the game. There's nothing like that's totally crazy off the spectrum here, but it is nuanced how it ties together to be in a 30-page rule book, 50 pages with everything else, and still streamlines and makes it fun. And then I think something else kind of with the mechanics that was really cool is if you, your face cards and your other individual cards that fall for your faction have different things, right? Like the lawmen had some kind of like good morally and ethically stuff to do as they were doing interruptions or playing it. And I played the Desperados a lot, and so it was fun. I played a game up here not too long ago against my wife, and she was the lawman. And one of the things I was able to do is Desperados, we're in the middle of a firefight, I'm kind of back against my wall, and I have the hostage card. And so I take a hostage where, if she shoots at me and I get under fire, she kills the hostage. So that was really flavorful, really cinematic. Loved how those mechanics gave you that feel and how they interacted. As far as, again, I think it's as far as it can be from crunchy. And with 12 modifiers, I still don't see that. Like, shooting is obviously going to be the bread and butter of any Wild West game. So I don't see how any of that had, an impact on it. As far as friction, how does the game kind of account for friction, and a little bit of kind of what Windhurst was talking about? Luck is your best friend in this game, and it's harkened to, if you're in a firefight, you know, it's the person who's going to get the card. I still think you're survivable, and it's not as simple as highest die wins. So we pick up the game. If somebody does get the drop on you, I think they're in a good position, but I don't think it's you know, undoable. There were a few games that I was able to crawl out of a hole on, and there were a few games where again, going back to that game with Ben, where I had the jump on him and ended up just getting smoked because his yellow belly Swede during that game was able to get away and kind of get back to his gang and load up on me. So great kind of system, great mechanics in my mind, and how they simple and effective and gave you the feel and nuance. So that's you know, other thoughts that you have on that or anything.
Yeah,
additional.
I like the initiative system. You know, you and I have always been big proponents of not doing the I go, you go. And I think the way they do it so for those who aren't familiar, you flip over, each person flips over one card from their deck. So you get to see what it is. I want to see what it is. And you place it by one model you want. So it could be a really low card or a really high card. And then the rest of your team gets face down cards. And then when everyone has their face down, you flip them over. And so you don't know, you know, you might have finished the previous turn with okay, I really need to go first, and get unlucky. They counter that with, like Kentuckian said, with you can react out of sequence with like a quick shot or a fallback to kind of help mitigate that. That I think that helps balance the luck. I think the one part where the luck kind of falls with the D20 is you can be in a situation where you've got a lot of modifiers in your favor and you should have this person dead to rights, point blank, with a shotgun or something, and you roll a 2. I mean, the one I get, you know, if it's like, when I play with my kids, they're always been like, explain what happens. They want the cinematic description. And so it's like, yeah, you ran up and you aimed and you shot and it went click. And, you know, you just forgot to reload last time. That's fine. But then when it's a 2, it's like, it doesn't feel right sometimes.
And I would say the only thing to push back on that with the shotgun that ended up negatively affecting me when I saw somebody use it. You know, when you have a shotgun that's like +4 or above, like I think +6 with both barrels, I can't remember. Normally an 11 or greater on the D20 is a hit, or under fire at least, right? Something like that, around the range of that. And so if you're already starting on a +6 with a short-barreled, you know, street howitzer, as White Earp calls it, you know, like you're in a pretty good spot. But it is, you know, you have the luck of the draw, you have the funny cinematic moments, and I agree they can be painful when you're the one that misses.
So I'll put it this way: you're on a D20. If you get a 10 or less, nothing happens. Unless you roll a 1, then you're out of ammo. So that's 50% chance of nothing happening except being out of ammo. And then there's a small range for where, you know, they get it under fire, and then a small range where it's under fire and maybe a nerve test, which is just another under fire. And then you need a 19 or a 20 just to KO. Now, the luck could go the other way, where it's like, I think it was one of the play battles, videos that you sent me to kind of like as we were preparing, and literally first shot of their game, first roll, 20. Dude lost his boss, and it was like, and I think he might have been able to play a card, but it was one of those like you needed to play the card before they rolled anything, like they declared a shoot, and it was like there's just nothing you can do now, like you just got unlucky. And I don't know, I feel like that's fine. Like sometimes you just get unlucky and it's the first shot has your name on it. But with 50% of the range being nothing happens, it was very swingy for us.
I would say it's a misnomer a little bit. I think 50% is base, and so you always have 3 actions per turn. I think you're normally at a greater percentage of, you know, you're 60. We're looking at the 60 percentage because you have the modifiers. You have just as many modifiers cutting for you as you kind of have cutting against you if you look at both the modifiers and supporting. So even if that stays constant, the ability for you to take an action and aim, you know, gives you the +1. With the rifle, you can get up to like +3 if you aim, an additional amount of time. So like there are things in there to kind of level the bubbles, or at least put it into normally it's a greater than 50% chance, I would say, to do some impact. And again, under fire markers, I do like how that's simple in the system. Like I played a lot of Western games where it's like, hey, you hit him in the hand, he loses the hand, which are really cool for the RPG feel. I love that feel of the game. But it makes it the simplicity in that, hey, 3 under fires and you're gone, 4 for your boss or whatever. Like that keeps it so simple that we're not looking to where he's damaged. We're not having to put a restriction on how he's moving or something because it was his kneecap over his elbow. So I do like the things that I would be kind of like reluctant to say, hey, these are why I like Wild West games, are they've really perfected the things I wouldn't even have thought about how it would have affected. And it's, in my mind, playability. But no, that's a great point on, I think, the 50%. And yeah, me and Windhurst, though, that might be a petri dish of study on how often we roll less than average.
But moving on to scores, I don't have anything else to say unless you have on this.
No.
All right, what'd you score it?
So simple and effective, nothing groundbreaking. The cards, the being able to interrupt. I agree with him. Windhurst made a comment about, if you played with kids, some of the cards you can only play that are in your hand at specific times. So if somebody's moved, somebody before the move. So you kind of have to know those cards a little bit. But it's still, I wouldn't say it's groundbreaking. And chance and luck do, factor into a little bit of how these Wild West gunfights, getting the drop on somebody. But the simple and effective nature, I still have it at what I would consider a little bit above average score, and I put it as 7, solid 7. And I really am leaning to higher, but me and Windhurst have talked. We've played with a lot of these mechanics in other games, and so I think it's above average. But yeah, I don't think it's not groundbreaking, the mechanics.
Yeah, I actually scored it a 9, fairly high. Because I like the card initiative mechanic. I'll talk later about some parts where aesthetics come into play. But the tokens are simple and they're very clear and they're kind of generic looking tokens, so you can use a lot of different tokens. And, the mechanics being able to fit on one quick reference sheet and it be super clear, and it's just, all right, just go down the list. Yeah, it felt a little crunchy the first couple games going back and forth. And I liked the card mechanic. The way they did it was fine. I mean, maybe I'm just being generous. I felt the mechanics-wise worked really well, and could work better if I had in-game set up more appropriately. Yeah, maybe I would have. Maybe a 9 is being a bit generous. A 10, maybe if it was like, oh man, this is something new. But my go-to set of Western rules does something very similar, and so this felt very similar to me, as far as how I like my games to run, my Western games to run, and so it was very almost nostalgic, I could say. This kind of card mechanic where cards are for initiative and they can do something special. Felt very normal for me, and it's something I already really like, so I think that's why I scored it a bit higher.
Solid score. Yeah, and to me, I probably just deducted for the groundbreaking. I was like, oh, it's a great game, somewhat effective, but it's nothing groundbreaking.
That hasn't, it's, and I think you and I talked offline that it feels like they took several different things other people have already done and kind of combined them in their own way, as opposed to coming up with something new, which is fine.
It's perfect. It's the best. I would say it's probably one of the better run card systems, interruption systems that I've played. So top notch. That's where I think our scores show that. Next category would be the player community. I think this is important for games, right? We're social creatures. As much as I never have solo played until I kind of started moving around, and then I wanted to get games in, and depending how thriving my community was, I could always kind of talk somebody into it. And, this is important, I think, as a war gamer who's a social creature who wants to play at a club or pick an opponent up. So some of the questions we're kind of using the lens of this is, if I pick this game up, will I find a local opponent? Are there conventions that support this game? Are there local clubs that support the system? Do people house rule the system? And kind of like what does this look like? So I think one of the things that we've used is like, what does the online community look like too, starting off on this? So the Facebook group Dead Man's Hand Official has about 4,500 people in it. Pretty solid. The game's been out for 10 years though. So that's my only thought on that is I think it's healthy. I definitely see people posting all the time on the Wild West stuff about the game. I've tried to post and spur interest in it as well. And they're I will say Great Escape Games here recently seems to be like really on fire for it with all the Kickstarters, the release, the new supplement. So, if I pick this game up, that first question, will I find a local opponent? In my mind, and what I've seen, I don't think so. I don't think that, at 4,500 people globally, I don't think, you're going to find it. And people may go through phases with this game the people I've talked to, like they kind of got into it. You go all in, you play a lot of scenarios, you play it for months, you play campaigns, and then you're like, okay, maybe you move on to another system. And I think you can make one. I think if you bought the starter set today, you could easily line up 2 or 3 opponents. I have a good buddy here, Dylan, plays a lot of historical games with me. Ancients, World War II, and I started posting like, man, I love watching Tombstone and getting back into it. And he was like, hey, I don't know the rules, but this looks cool. And so he painted up fantastically. I will mention, painted up 2 kind of factions, generic kind of factions that look really awesome, and just got into it. With the entry cost into this game, I think you can grow your own opponent in seconds. Are there conventions that support the game near me? I don't really see as the big Western game, and I didn't really want to talk about this in playability, like Desperado. So I grew up, 4 years old was one of my first war games at Historicon, and playing in Desperado, written by Tom Kelly, a fellow Kentuckian. And, based on the stacking of decks, if you played generically how it is, I think, the most you're getting is, 4 people on the table. And I've talked to I've never ran a game with Dead Man's Hand that big before. I've ran 2 or 3 people on the table, and it really shined. But I talked to some of my buddies who've played like 6-player games, and, you've combined decks or done something like that. I think it can break down, I would say, at more players. And some of the kind of convention Western games where you've got 10 plus 15 plus people, at a table, everybody has their little side missions. There's some RPG nature to it, of what's going on. I don't think this will shine there, and I don't even know if it can reach that height. I'm going to try to stress that. And if there's other people that have played it, please let me know. And talking to Scott, one of my buddies in Nashville, who's hosted like a 6-person game, it is stressed, kind of is what his adage was to me. So I think that would kind of deter some of this being posted at a convention other than like a 2 to 4 player game. Are there local clubs that support the system? I know of that Scott in Nashville that had all the foreground buildings beautifully painted. I posted some of the battle reports on there. So there are people that have it. I don't think it's a hard entry to find it. I think a lot of, Wild West isn't new to wargaming. And me and Windhurst, kind of one of the first games that I got into, and I think it's an easy game for beginners that we talked about. Person hosted me for a game kind of off the start. And then once I got my old Adobe kind of town back out, and my old Foundry models that I played Desperado with for years, I think it's easy to jump into. So, not clubs big here in the States. I see gaming groups maybe go through it in their system that they, let's pull out Old West if we've got nothing else to do. Or, I hope people with the resurgence that Great Escape Games is doing kind of get on fire for it, because I think it's a great period. Rich in history, and I think it would be a lot of fun. And then the last kind of question here is, do people house rule the system? And so, if so, is it the same game with those rules? I don't know. I can't really tell that. I think the things that me and Windhurst have talked about, my guess would be is the parts where it is so simplistic, 30 pages of rules. You don't really have to. I think the only thing that would house rule would be some of the depth. Character campaigns, maybe special missions, a bank robbery that you wanted to kind of portray. I think you could easily do it. but I don't think you'd really need to do it with anything else. And I don't see the game being drastically different. Like we've talked about rule sets here in the past being played in this state or region versus this state or region, but I look forward to feedback on this podcast about people who have changed rules, really like it, or, come up with new scenarios and ways to change it. But going back to those 4 questions, Windhurst, what are your kind of thoughts on, what you think about the local opponent? Will you find one? Are there conventions that support it, the local clubs, and do people house rule it? What are your kind of thoughts with the community on that?
Yeah, so speaking again, being over here in the UK right now, when I started posting pictures of it and that I was getting into this, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, that's a good game. I played that with friends, or I played that with family and stuff. And so I think because the wargaming community is more condensed over here, you have a better chance of finding local groups that will pick it up and play, or that have picked it up and played it in the past. And so if you're just coming into it, you'd be like, yeah, I want to try this. Like, oh yeah, we've played that. We've got it. Yeah, we'll set it up. I think is a pretty good chance. I feel like when I see a lot of convention reviews, pretty often there's a Wild West table, and I feel like half the time it's this or something else. So I think there's pretty good. It is run fairly often. So again, at the local clubs, again, it's such an easy, like Kentuckian said, it's such an easy entry level game that I think if you have someone who's interested in Wild West or has played any other Wild West game and has their own stuff, this is a very easy game to get into and pick up. And I also agree with Kentuckian as far as when it comes to house ruling. I don't know. I think because we're fairly new into the game, we don't know what people are doing. I ran a 4-person game, I think, where it does break down, like Kentuckian said, and it was the same issues we had in the Muskets and Tomahawk 2nd Edition, where the card mechanics include cards in a person's hand. That can be challenging with multiplayer games because it's either do we all have our own hand of cards, in which case you're going to need more decks to make that work, or does one person have the hand of cards, and then how do we make sure that their use of those cards is fair and equitable? In my 4-person game, we didn't use the hands and cards, and it worked fine. Like, I had 2 people on the kind of outlaw side and 2 people on the lawman side, each with their little groups, and they just came from the same deck for each side, and that worked fine. So I could see a bigger person game working the same way, and if you had like if I was running this at a convention, I'd probably have 2 people who are part of the running it, leading the outlaws and leading the lawmen, and they might have the cards in hand. That way they understand how they work, and they can make sure they get used appropriately, and they can kind of get the buy-in from the other players of when to use it. And you could use one deck of cards as far as for the initiative cards. I think it could work that way. But that might be where people end up house ruling, is how do they house rule it in order to get more people in the game.
Yeah, my only pushback on that would be the cards in hand gives you that dynamic nature, as you know, as you play through turns, sure, where some of these cards like don't mean anything for this turn, but then you definitely need this fallback, or a type of duck card in the next round, and it's like, well, is it being used? But I do get to your point. Like, I think then it would totally be on initiative driven, so it would be whoever gets the drop probably has the benefit. Those cards in hand, I think, allow the players to climb out of the hole.
Well,
but again, I'd love to see it.
You still have the fallback, and you have the quick shot, and if you get a joker, you still get 2 actions. So I think even without the cards in hand,
you have some wiggle room.
And I think that's a really, talking about mechanics, that was a really clever way of avoiding that. Well, I really don't want to go last, but I ended up with a 2, and you're not totally just out on the ringer. You've got some wiggle room. But I think if you were to run it a larger game with one person with a card in hand, you just got to make sure whoever's doing that is a real good team player and can be like, all right, guys, this is what we got. When is the right time to use it? So we can only use it once. Do we want to risk it with your dude over there, or do we want to save it for later and just be a team? And I feel like,
Yeah, we'd love. I just second your point. This, please, somebody, if you're
yeah,
listening
let
to
us
this,
know in the
or
comments how
let
you've
us
done it.
know how you've done 6-player or more. But keep going, Windhurst.
Yeah, and so I think there is a way to do it within the rules as written, without it breaking down too much. It's one of those situations where it's going to take good players, and I think it's easy with a game like this because it's not a competitive game, right? It's a fun game, and I think it'd be very easy to have a player like that and be like, okay, well, maybe you've got the boss, and we've got all like the goons and stuff, and boss gets to use the cards where they see fit, and it could be fun that way. But yeah, I think either you're going to find people who do play it, have played it, or are willing to play it pretty easily in most places, in my opinion.
What do you score it?
I give it an 8 because and that again is from the view of here in the UK, locally speaking. Just to give us that bigger view, I think finding local players here and a good community here is pretty easy.
I gave it a 6. I would say on par, or probably just on par is what I would say. It's not all over the place, but I think it's easy to grow your own and build 1 or 2 opponents in a matter of seconds, because the game lends itself to this kind of beer and pretzels of the West. So it's, I think it's easy to go. There was a lot of times when I'd host people for tournaments, or I'd host events, people would be driving from a few states away, and we'd play like Cruel Seas or something the night before, and just kind of a palate cleanser. And I think this is the game to kind of beat for that. And then I think with all the other depth to it, like people are easily, people drop less than $100 to get into something to try it out. And then I think with anybody being willing to do that, and you're talking $50 3D printed models in the rule books, like you're there, like you have it, you can play most anything 3D printed, or build your own ramshackle shack or western town, which would probably be pretty easy to do with balsa wood.
Yeah.
I think you're there. And so my thing is I think it is so easy to play and get people, but I think that cuts against that. You don't see it like crawling out from every corner. It's a happy accident that people had it in one of the bigger, towns in the United States here, Nashville, Tennessee. But out of a pretty thriving game club, for 1 out of, 20, 30 people to have it and be kind of into it, that was, pro and con in it. So really look forward to what they do in the future. And I think this score is going to increase as the days tick on here. And I think, with the release of their supplements, the release of all their new great figures, their buildings, everything that Great Escape Games is doing, I expect that score will be higher a lot sooner. But I'll kick it over to you as we continue to speed through these and get to support.
Yep. So support, we're talking about the publishers, creators, and other companies. Are there regular erratas and updates? How often do they do supplements? Do they keep the game fresh? Is the change they bring to the game good, or is it too much? Looking at this game as we are, again, jumping into it after it's already had a new edition, not coming at it from, hey, we started at the first edition. They've got 1 supplement out right now and another one on the way. And it sounds like when they had the first edition, they had a couple supplements. They don't seem to be... It's... do you have the good?
I do not. I do not.
So I don't want to say, do the supplements add stuff that breaks the game or doesn't? The feedback I feel like from the community, from what I've noticed, it doesn't. I haven't seen anyone complaining. I'll put it that way. I haven't seen complaints that like, oh, how does this work, or how does this mesh? So, and that's usually a really good litmus test of how the supplements, because people are very quick to complain about stuff. And I feel like if there were breakdowns in the supplement to the core set of rules, we would be hearing about it. We'd be seeing posts about it. All I see is excitement. So I don't feel like the supplements are too much or breaking the game in any way. There seems to be a lot of excitement for the new supplements, and what they add to the game. Some of the things we mentioned is, getting more nuance in the characters and their abilities and everything. It's something like for our styles of play that we're looking forward to, that the supplements might bring to the table. The company seems very alive and active in supporting the game. Like if you go to Great Escape Games and you look at on their front page what's new, they've got 2 rows of like new models. The whole top row is all Wild West stuff. You know, they got Kickstarters for new minis, they got new supplements coming out. So like the company is alive and well and actively supporting this game. And everything I have seen from the community is positive and excitement. No one is like dreading or has anything bad to say about what's coming down the pipe. So from that perspective, it seems like all the change has been good change and well received, and keeping the game fresh. And you know, if anything, people are wanting more. So like I did a bunch of casualty models from Great Escape Games, and someone's like, I can't wait till they come out with casualty horses and mounted figures to go with the mounted figures. Like people are excited and they want more, and I think Great Escape Games is providing that. So yeah, I don't have much more to say on as far as like from the publisher side and how they're supporting the company. I think is excellent. Kentucky, what are your thoughts?
I really co-sign. I think you wrapped that up quite nicely. I co-sign everything you said. I think starting with the good, you know, in their supplement, that's a good start. And as far as like flooding out with all the releases and getting the crowd excited about it with their social media and everything else, you know, the buildings are fantastic. The amount of effort and detail. I showed you, you know, one of the sprues, the customization that you can do. The building itself, although not super cheap unless you buy the starter set. You know, great detail, the wood grain, the doors open, quick paint job, and you've got your city. Everything that they're doing to kind of push it from the written word that supports the game to the actual models and terrain that support it is top notch. And I really think it's how you should do it. It is getting people excited. It's giving them, you know, it seems to be steady. And that's another thing that sometimes systems don't do, and or companies don't do for systems. So totally co-sign. Have nothing else really to add to it. I'll give you my score.
Yeah.
Kind of going into it, it's trending in a great direction with plastic gunfighters, both male and female, plastic buildings, mounted plastic figures, and the release of the good. I hope it keeps going that way. All signs indicate yes. I give it an 8, and I think it's still trending upwards, and an 8 is an above average score for me. So yeah, 8. What about yourself?
Actually, I gave it a 10.
Woo!
Yeah, I don't know how they could be doing better, honestly. I don't know what more you could ask a company. You know, having come from rule sets that didn't have changes in a long time, and those changes I didn't always agree with, or other games that have changes too often, that make it feel like I got to buy the rule set again, or I got to buy the new supplement, or I just can't play. And I had a personal experience with them where I wanted to build my own gang. I actually wanted to make one that represented like each one of us in my family. And I had a post like the Millers. And so they had the Cowboys, the John Wayne movie with the kids. And it's like, man, they have kid models. I don't want the whole, but they don't sell them individually. It's a whole gang. So I emailed them and I was like, listen, this is what I'm doing. Do you have like extra castings or one? And they said, which one do you want? Like, which kid model do you want? And I said, just grab one and send it to me. And just tell me how much. And they did. And I think like that level of commitment and to their community and to the people who support them is like, you can't beat that. So for me, the score just reflects that they do exactly what I want every wargaming company to do. I think it is a premier example of how, and even the run, like they've got the plastics, they've got metal minis for their pre-made factions, and it's a miniature agnostic rule set. Like they're doing it right, in my opinion. Yep. As far as from the company, again, a lot of my scores are a bit generous, but yeah, to me, they're doing it perfect.
No, I agree. If I'd have asked them, I might have been at a 10 if I'd have got my own model and been like, hey, I just want this one. But I think 8 is above average for me. Yeah. And I think, you know, fantastic is what they do. I hope they continue to keep up the pressure. So Stuart and them all at Great Escape Games, awesome stuff that you guys are doing. So moving on to the next one, 8, support from third parties. Do other companies support the game, the miniatures, the terrain, the tokens? It's real down and dirty, so this is going to be a quick one. You can buy, print, and play whatever you like in the way of gunfighters and terrain. It is probably one of, I would say, the most printable type of terrain. Besides, World War II is up there, but as far as the variants and everything else, a buddy printed me that drunken gunfighter I showed you. Like, pennies on the dollar for this stuff, and you're into the game with the rule book. Like, I think it's all over the place. So it's good. I've seen a few of the third-party token sets, not as popular as like some of the stuff I've seen for Saga and some of like even Muskets and Tomahawks. But it's out there, and I think even Sarissa, when I was looking through their stuff, they were obviously made for several types of Western games, but they had the hit markers, they had like maybe aiming and stuff, and they're pretty consistent. So I think it is supported real well. Going right into my score before we go to your comments, I gave it an 8.5 because I think it's above average. It's up there with World War II. Like, you're going to be able to find it under any rock you look like under, and it's not. I wouldn't put it much higher because I don't think it's like oversaturated. Like, you can find Adobe towns, you can find Wild West towns, and the models are, it's build your own adventure. You want an eye patch, you want a guy that looks like, Clint Eastwood. I can think of a half dozen companies that make that model, the Blondie or the no-named guy. What about you, Windhurst?
Yeah, so again, also pretty short and sweet to the point. There are loads of companies making I feel like there's more companies making Western stuff than there are rule sets, really. When you talked about community, I feel like Wild West games are kind of a niche within the hobby community, the historical gaming community, because they're kind of this amalgamation of historical fiction almost. Like, there's a few historical examples of things happening, but a lot of it is more this kind of historical fiction. And so I think it's kind of a niche community. So there's a lot of companies that make Wild West figures, STL files to print, Wild West style buildings. And the tokens are so generic looking that you don't necessarily... I don't think there are third-party companies specifically making stuff for Dead Man's Hand necessarily, as that they've done a good job of making stuff so generic requirements for their game that you can use anything. Several of the games I have, I could use their tokens for this game because they're basically the same. And so I think you could, if you wanted, the only things you would have to buy from Great Escape is the rule book, and that's it. Like, you could just use regular cards, playing cards, and just keep a list if you want from the rules themselves, and then go buy everything else if you absolutely wanted to, or if you had everything else from third party. Like, to me, that level of third party support makes this the entry level of this game so low. So I scored it a 9 because, like, if you can get everything you need to play the game except the rules from other companies, then what more do you need?
You're cooking. No, go. I'll let you take it over to strongest. Our last two are sometimes our most controversial, but we do these because we want to weight, the system itself. We feel systems sometimes shine, or maybe don't shine for some of these reasons. So I'll let you take over number 9, and I'll do our controversial number 10.
All right. So yeah, number 9 is our strongest reasons for the game and against the game. But essentially, we like to say if we give it over a 5, we recommend it in this section. Sometimes, I think, as Kentucky has referred to himself in some other rule sets, he's the Candyman on his scores. I feel like today I'm kind of a bit the Candyman. But just keep in mind, if we're giving it over a 5, that is a positive. We maybe there's room for improvement. So I broke mine down. The reason for it is overall a simple, fun game. I played it with kids ages 7, 8, and 10, and they had fun. They enjoyed it. Even if the shooting portion was kind of like, okay, every time I had to go through it for them, they were having a good time. They enjoyed it. and they felt like it was cinematic, and they wanted to talk out like what was happening in the way they pictured it, and they enjoyed it. And I think, if you can get kids playing a game and it's fun, then you're doing something right for a game like this. My biggest thing against, and this is a personal issue, was table clutter. I don't like having the cards on the table like that. I think it really detracts from how good the game looks. And I feel like they mislead you a little bit in the rule book because they constantly have all these nice pretty pictures with just the models. But when you have the tokens and the initiative cards on the table, I don't like a lot of stuff on my table other than the models and the terrain. I will say, in their defense, the tokens, Kentucky has showed them a couple times, held them up. Their color palette is fairly simple. It's like a kind of deserty tan and the markers are in kind of like a muted brown. And so if you're playing on like a Western themed table, like arid or desert, it doesn't detract too much. But you can end up with 4 or 5 counters on model, and then if with 6 models aside in a finely condensed area, you've got all these initiative cards, and they don't. Sometimes it's hard to see who they go with, and because you don't have like individual character cards or anything, even lining them up with your roster sheet's not super efficient. And so for me, personally, the biggest detractor from enjoying the game was table clutter with this stuff, and that was like, if that's a big deal for you, that's going to be an issue. And it is a bit of a big deal for me, and that was my biggest reason against. It wasn't the mechanics or anything, it was just how pretty my game looks. And I couldn't come up with a really good way. Now, after I had scored this, I was looking on their website. They do sell tokens to represent all the cards. I don't know if that's the best solution. Yes, it's a much smaller thing. It's another token. But that means I'm going to put out all my cards, and now I got to go through my tokens and get the right token to go with that goes with the card. I don't know.
I talked with somebody about doing like there's some Wild West games I have where I have the character cards, and so you put the card on the character. But I don't know if I even like that. Like you put it off the table on the character and be like, hey, this is what he drew, flip him over. Because there is a speed and ease where the opponent can look, and you can look at the same time to say like, hey, this is what everybody has.
Yeah. The way they do the initiatives, I don't know a good fix action. I know how other games do the way they use cards is different, and so that's not a problem. So the way it's done in Demon, I just don't know a really good way around it, and that to me is a problem. So I gave it a 7. That's my lowest score. It's still a really good score because honestly, that's just a personal taste issue. But if that is something that is important to you, which I fully acknowledge is not important to all players out there, is like how much clutter there is on the table. It is a huge factor for me. I like a pretty table. And the more that breaks the immersion for it, the less happy I am about it. So that was my big for and against. What about you, Kentucky?
My 4 is cheap, quick, and fun. I think it's been a stream for this, and it's kind of weighting what I think are just critical parts of the success of this game is, it's extremely cheap to get into, extremely quick to play, several games, and fun. And I think I talked to you about it, and I still stand behind this. If I'm trying to get somebody branched into tabletop wargaming, this is probably the game I'm going to use. I have used Bolt Action in the past. I have used Blood Red Skies and some other things where you're moving the 1 or 2 vehicles or things on the table. I think this is super fun, and it goes to the point of more immersive to where you're out of that. And then I do think, the things that to some degree cut against it for me are, I would say table clutter is one of them. However, I think they've designed some things that can get away from that. And there are some nuanced things that we said with like the character card, but I do agree with you that can be kind of disconcerting when you see this beautifully laid out terrain and you've got 5 or 6 cards strawed all over it. I would say the one thing against it for me is the depth, where it's super quick and fun. The Wild West games that we've played and we've grown up on, whether it be Legends of the Old West or Desperado or, Gunfighter's Ball, the Wiley Games one,
Fistful.
like Fistful led. Those games can have some pretty decent depth to it that allow for a lot of, the RPG-ness of it. But as far as like, if you're going to go through phases and kind of always come back to the Old West to some degree, like this is the game for you. And I highly recommend anybody who's a tabletop wargamer, go out and pick up what I would like to call as, and for you 40K cats out there, Kill Team Historical. All right. It's a great rule set. And so I give it a 9. I think it, cheap, quick, fun. You can't beat it. And my little knocks against it, I think it's crushing it. So we'll move it on. Did you already score it?
Yeah, I gave it a 7. But real quick, I will add, if you get the cards from Great Escape Games, they're actually half-size cards. So they come in a box that looks like a normal size card box. But yeah, you got them there. If you're watching on YouTube, can you open it so you can show them? Yeah, they're like half size. So they're in this little box. And that does help a lot. If they were full size cards, it would be a much bigger issue trying to put all those on the table, especially if you got like a close-in gunfight and they're all close together. So I think Great Escape acknowledges that's a risk, and they have done their best to minimize the table clutter. So I don't want to give them too much grief for that.
Yeah, and the tokens, additional add-ons, not too expensive, but they would, I think, even help reduce that further. So moving on to the it factor. This is our swing category. It's our 10 out of 10. In the it factor, we talk about, additional caveats not captured in other categories, or weighting, them a little bit differently. And I'll just cut to the chase. Again, we're doing decent on time, so it pulls together a bunch of basic mechanics and gives you a very good game, a great game, some may say. You can't really put your finger on a specific mechanic or nuance that is different from kind of any other Western game that you've played if you're a veteran Western gamer. But it's streamlined and enjoyable. And the shooting for the moon on fun, they have done it, and they have succeeded, and they've done a great job on it. And I think the cuts that I've given against it on depth, they are making up for it with these bolt-on additions for the good, the supplements, the different gangs, and all those things. But I think as of right now, and if we said this was a deep dive on the rules themselves. This isn't a deep dive on the good. This isn't saying, everything and going every rock that's out there to uncover it. This is the rules themselves as they stand. I'd put it at a 6. And the only reason I put it as a 6 is because, again, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it is doing a solid job. And I would say, that 6 to 7 range, like 6 and 7 for me are kind of on par or in that range. 7s are you doing a little bit better than that. And this is, I just say, for the it factor. When you play this game, you're going to be like, man, I feel like I've played a million Western games like this. They use cards, they use the card mechanics, they have some interruptions, they have some different nuances to it. And I think it's a great, fantastic game, but the reasons it's scored so well in some of the categories are because it is so streamlined. And for me, if you're looking at what's the it factor, what would you tell people, is the thing that kind of brings you to this game? And I would just say simple and fun, cheap, quick, and fun. Like, it will get you there. And so to me, that kind of is a tick in the it factor. It's it's not totally average. It's not something that's, going to break the mold. And that's where I think it stands. So maybe not the Candyman today, but I still think it's a good score for what I have. What do you have in the it factor, Windhurst?
Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what you said. When I think it factor, when we've done other rules reviews, it's like, okay, if you're like, all right, what is it about this rule set that's awesome? It's like, man, this mechanic is so cool. I love this mechanic. And there isn't one in this set of rules. There is no it. Kind of my version of what Kentuckian was just saying, is it feels generic, which is a good thing in the sense that, Kentucky and I both came from different sets of historical wargaming rules and Wild West rules. And we both felt kinship and familiarity with this set of rules, never having played it before. And so it's a great set of rules to bring players together who either have never played Wild West or who have played other Wild West rules, because there's so much that feels familiar. Like Kentucky said, you feel like you've played a lot of games like this one. Is a good way to bridge gaps for players, I think. If someone's like, oh, I really like this one, and someone's like, I really like this one, it's like, well, let's try this one, and we kind of all get something we like and we're familiar with. And I think that's a really strong suit of it, but it also means that it doesn't have anything individually in it that is special and unique in the rules itself. It's really fun and it's really cheap. The cheap necessarily has to come from the rules itself, though. That's just because it's so generic, you can use so much stuff with it. But the fun is 100%. Like, they did a really good job on just making a fun set of rules. And so I only gave it a 5. Just on the it factor, because they're just like, what do you want me to say? What is there to say that makes this rule so special? I don't think there is something in it that makes it so special, other than they've just...
Some of its parts, yeah. Some of its parts.
It really is. There's not one thing to point at. And so for this category, I don't have anything specific to point at. And so I just put it at the middle, gave it a 5.
Okay, to do a quick review on just the categories alone before we say our scores. All right, so I'm looking at category 1, what we talked about with presentation, right? Book, PDF, all of that stuff. Category 2, where we talked about, what is it trying to achieve? What is the rule set going after? Fun, skirmish, those things. Category 3, gatekeeping. Category 4, playability. Category 5, rules, mechanics, and nuances. Category 6, opponents, player, community. And then category 7, support from publisher, which I agree it is top marks. And then 8, support from third parties. And then we talked about 9 and 10 are strongest reasons for and against, and then that it factor. So we've tried to use a holistic approach that we've reviewed all of our rule sets with, and we've given them, these scores that we say. And again, I will say I've tried to be objective in a lot of these reviews, right? We will tell our biases to you before. Me and Windhurst really loved French and Indian War period. It's a place near and dear to our heart. We're kind of from that area of Appalachia. Bolt action, chain of command, these other rule sets that we've reviewed, we've tried to be as objective as we can. And again, at least tell you, hey, if we have a bias, here's where it's at. I believe it's the same lens that we've applied here with our own biases about what we want to get out of the games. And I think that's where you see, us diverge on scores. So hopefully to the listener, to the viewer, you understand, like, okay, do I tend to be more towards Windhurst? Do I tend to be towards Fighting Kentuckian? And where, in that different opinions, you hopefully get a very objective kind of test for the rule set. So with all of that said, Windhurst, what is your score?
My final score was 80 out of 100. And just to add to your caveat, I don't think we've ever done... I know we've never done a deep dive specific. We have maybe on comparisons. We've never done a deep dive on a rule set we didn't like. Now, part of that is we kind of know and have a feel for things we'll like and things we don't like. So we're unlikely to be like, I'm going to spend money on this set of rules that I already feel like is garbage, and I'm going to tell you, do a deep dive and tell you why it's garbage. So keep that in mind for our listeners. Keep that in mind. Our scores are probably all going to be in the positive side to some degree. This is just how much maybe really do we like it and we recommend it. So I gave it an 80. I think it's and that's because it's really good. It's a really good set of game. But is it the best game out there, or is it the best Western set of rules out there? For everybody, maybe not. Is it going to be my go-to now? Kind of like Kentuckian has alluded, like I think it is a go-to for certain situations. Will it replace my previous go-to set of Western rules? Maybe not. If I have a choice, if someone's like, hey, I want to play Western, what rules do you recommend? I've got my other set. But if someone's like, "Hey, have you heard of this game, Dead Man's Hand?" I was like, "Yeah, I do. I have nothing but good things to say about it. I recommend it." If someone's like, "Hey, I want to play this," I was like, "I've got a set of rules. Let me get it out and we'll play it, and I'll have a great time and I'll look forward to that game." And I won't be trying to undermine it, being like, "Yeah, it's good, but you should try this one instead," because I think it stands great on its own 2 feet. So I think an 80 reflects that opinion.
I gave it a 78.8. And so I'm really close. I think that's fantastic in the sense that, as you saw, there were some scores where me and Windhurst were a 10 and a 6, I think was our biggest disparity. Like there are some things that we weighted differently, but even when we kind of went and meandered through, and we didn't know our scores until we're filming, recording this episode. So that was an added kind of bonus. But I do think I find it, a great game. I think this is again, just as an azimuth check for the listener or the viewer, some of the top World War II games that we've played, and like I played daily, and Windhurst, has played events and stuff, when we talk some of the I would say the juggernauts out there in systems, like we're rating, mid 80s. And those are the best systems we think, that are out there. And they're definitely captivating a majority of the wargaming community. So I don't want anybody to think like if this is a school grade of like an 80 is a B or somewhere in there. No, I think if you're in the 80s with us, like you are, you're going to get a highly recommend. Like 90 is, I would say, if we're being honest, unachievable, because there's always things that rule sets can do, a little bit better. And so being in the 80s, being really close to that threshold, and me or a point or two away, if I'm just in bad mood, maybe. I love Stuart and I love Great Escape Games. Can't say enough good things about that company, and all the other stuff that they do. But I would say, again, super strong rule set. I think this, for me, Legends of the Old West was huge growing up, and Desperado was huge growing up. Desperado, it's got something to fill its place right now with Gunfighter's Ball and everything that they're doing out there. And I bought that rule set. I look forward to kind of gaming with that as well. Legends of the Old West, what me and Windhurst have both played, we really like some of the RPG-isms I think that rule set can bring to the table. But this, it's hard to get people excited about your period, and we've talked about this with gaming and finding opponents on, hey, I like to game, this is not true, but like War of Spanish Succession, that's my thing. I think it's a lot easier to get somebody into the Wild West and to build an opponent and home grow it. 5-10 models, a building or two, and you're done. This rule set, and you're done. And you can play through most scenarios, most of the action scenes that you want. You live out those movies. Every time I'm painting on my models, I have one of the old spaghetti westerns playing. I just watched like Hang 'em High and Fistful of Dollars the other night. I watched Tombstone 4 times, as I told you when I bought the ERP models in a row. So I mean, like, it's a great cinematic feel for the system. I really, I can't give it another recommendation. And I hope, everybody's like, oh, it's 78.8 or whatever, you're not even at 80. No, it's there. Like, in my mind, I think I've got nothing but good things to say about it. And anything that, the knocks that I had were, I'm being honest about, biases that I have towards Western games or things that I've gotten out of them that I want to get out of them. But teaching a 3 and a 5-year-old to teaching kids to play this game, as Windhurst did, and my 2 daughters played it, and to have fun, amazing. And I played veteran wargamers at a definitely, a stapled wargaming group, and had a blast. And those are people that play, Napoleonics, and my kid can color in between the lines. And fun and smiles and laughs were had at both games. So I think that really tells where I think they have found that sweet spot. And it's not going to be everything to everybody, but pick it up. If you got the models, you're not going to go wrong in picking it up and giving it a shot. You will. I'm not going to 100% guarantee it, because maybe you're just one of those wargaming Karens or something out there, but I think more than likely you are going to have fun with the set. So any other alibis or anything that you would have, I think this will complete our review of the rule set, and we will get ready to move on to the next section.
Yeah. So
in your thoughts.
Yeah, the final parting thoughts on the rules itself. I think its biggest selling point, other than cheap and fun, is its genericness. Because even as we were thinking about like what's my go-to set, even my preferred set of rules is not as quick to set up as this because it does require a bit more character creation. And so it's like, I think all the other sets of rules out there for Western, they have their it factor or their go-to kind of gimmick, and people love it or hate it. But this is so generic that it's hard to imagine people not enjoying this game. It was really hard to imagine someone, they might be like, oh, well, it doesn't have this one thing I really like from this other game. But that's not going to stop them from having fun. I feel like everyone's going to enjoy playing this. And that's a big point in its favor. And yeah, so if you're out there and you're like, man, I'd like to get into Western and I don't know what to get, or you're like in a situation like we are where we move around a lot, our gaming group changes quite regularly because of the nature of our lives. This is a really safe set of rules to get that you're probably going to always find someone willing to play, and after they've played it, they're going to want to come back and play some more. So I think it's a safe investment. So moving on to our final two categories for the episode, we got our kit bag and then our scouting report. So kit bag is something that we recommend. What did we decide this week, Kentuckian?
I think we said we went through several things that I don't know if we ended up on Black Friday.
Yes.
Or painting utensils.
Yeah.
There were special painting utensils that I do not have that Windhurst has that swears by, but I think we settled on Black Friday because of our impulse buyness.
Yeah. And so that's just that time of year. So we know some companies don't support Black Friday, and I respect their decision not to. It has kind of grown globally into this weird thing that I think has lost sight of why it started in the first place. And I know some businesses just can't afford to run discounts, especially wargaming businesses. I'm surprised so many do run Black Friday sales because the margin for profit is so small in the wargaming community. But because we love the hobby and we want people in on it, my thoughts on Black Friday sales, Cyber Monday deals it can be a real boon to hobbyists, because the hobby can be one of those more expensive hobbies. And so I know Kentuckian and myself will both often throughout the year kind of keep in mind, okay, when the big sales come around, what is it we want to buy up? And I think there's nothing wrong with that. You want to get the most out of your dollar or your pound or your euro when you're in this hobby. And so kind of hedging your bets on the sales to kind of do that big bulk buy is fine. And might be a really good strategy for people who otherwise might struggle to afford to get into this excuse me get in this hobby. But my only reason I don't buy as much on Black Friday as I do is because I can't wait that long, and I want my stuff now, and so I don't wait for the sale. But I'm financially lucky enough to be in a situation where I can afford to do that and just be like, well, I could wait 4 more months and get it on sale for 15 or 20 to 10% off, but I don't want to wait that long. I want it now. But yeah, so this episode should be up by Black Friday, and then there's Cyber Monday after that. So if you have time to take advantage of the sales, I recommend it. What are your thoughts, Kentuckian?
No, I concur. I think both of us are the same. We tell ourselves we wait for the sale, but we end up, buying truckloads prior to then. I think the sale is great to, round out armies sometimes with the price of lead and plastic constantly going up. It's a good combatant for that. I mean, I think me and Windhurst have been there, whether we're struggling students or, whatever the case may be. And I know somebody, if you're looking for financial independence and you're still wanting to be engaged in the hobby, it allows a good entry point for some other people as well. And it's a good way to continue to help support local brick and mortars. I know my local FLGS is doing something for Black Friday, like 20% off. So it's awesome. Everybody kind of takes in it, and it's a good time to, I think, maybe knock out that unit, complete that army. And then the only thing I was going to add is sometimes it's, there's several sets of rules where I'll look and I'll be like, it's just not for me, or I don't really like the feel of it. There's a few things I like about it. line of miniatures that I'm really into, and Black Friday will kind of give me an entry point to say, okay, the risk, if I'm looking at dollar amount or whatever it is to get into that new system or get into that new set is not as great now. And so we definitely, it's hard for a sale or at least, to be in your kit bag, but I would say that it definitely has been a staple of how we navigate the hobby, with it being, it's a pastime, and it's, it's whatever your discretionary income is. I think it's an avenue to help kind of have at your beck and call to, to complete that army, whether you're rolling in money or you're, just scratching the dollars to maybe, hey, I've got a few plastic models that I'm thinking about getting into this. I keep imagining myself as like a struggling high school or college student, that might not be totally occupied with the wargaming scene, and I've still used it even back then. So I would love it if people would post, or comment, what is the best Black Friday sales that you've seen? I've built a lot of ancient armies before I sold some of those metal ones from the Foundry sale that happens every time this year. Obviously Warlord Games has great sales that rotate through, and then I don't know when they're going off, and I'm like, oh man, I should have bought that. There's always that impulse. There were a few sales that companies, again, kind of came on the spur of the moment. I'm still waiting for some of the Black Friday sales to hit from some of the companies. Looking at used cigar box battle mats, so I can pick up some of those. I'm sure Corey will get that posted soon. But again, another time to get more into the hobby and not have it hurt your wallet. And so this TTP, this tactic, has kind of always been in mine and Windhurst's back pocket, and just very thankful and fortunate for the companies that do kind of support those. Again, no shade at the companies that don't. I understand it. It is a small margin, as Windhurst said, but thankful for you guys who do, that allow us to continue to progress it.
So real quick, just to add, I think the kit bag item to take away is, as our goal with this podcast is to grow and promote the historical wargaming community. If you are somebody who is interested in joining the historical wargaming community, but you're put off by the price point of big armies and stuff, keep an eye out for the sales. Most of the big companies will do sales throughout the year, and most of them also do the Black Friday sales, so you can count on that every year. So please don't be discouraged by, well, I can't afford all the models for this big army, and leverage the sales. If you don't need to, then buy throughout the year when you need to. Support those companies as best you can. But for the kit bag, don't use the price point as an excuse not to try this amazing hobby, because there will be sales for most companies and you can get in on it.
50% off to some companies. So, I mean, that's awesome. So moving into our scouting report, binoculars, what's on our painting table, what's kind of coming up next in the gaming. I have been off hobby topic. I've been super busy at work, having a really fun time being busy. And it's not gotten any easier. I normally host a Thanksgiving event. I just could not get around to it this year. Couldn't set it up. Didn't want to do, for lack of a better word, a half-assed job. And so just kind of talked to the local store that I told them, like, hey, I normally do these things. I just can't. I'm going to try to look to do something early in the next part of the year to kind of get back into the grind, especially with new Bolt Action version 3. However, with the lack of that, I've been able to participate, like I said, in the Patton event, which was great to end on a high note with version 2. And my boys that initially brought me to the dance, the early Blitzkrieg army, did very well. As far as hobby and time, the stress at work, and as we use these hobbies to kind of get to mindfulness, get away, get an escape, go to the passions you love. The Gauls and Ancients are always going to be a huge passion for me. If you've been updated with my page, I have painted a lot of Gauls, and I have a lot more to go. And so they're coming. I don't know if you can see them. They're coming. But again, over, close to 300 or 250 painted right now. Another bunch of cav units to go. So I really look forward to getting those guys done. But with Windhurst and us talking about doing this rule set, kind of the thing that's given me a good break from painting Celts and Gauls are, our Wild West Dead Man's Hand, a few other new rule sets that I want to try out. And again, kind of working on my models. I've got Tuco, Angel Eyes, and Clint Eastwood there, and I've got about 24 models that I kind of want to get painted from Knuckle Duster Miniatures. Great company, fantastic models. You cannot beat them. They are the best, in my mind, in Wild West line for metal models out there. But that's kind of what's on the hobby table. And kind of looking to the future, I fall into the same category as Windhurst, and I'll kind of tie it up with this, is looking to do a PCS, this summer moving. And so me and Windhurst, it's an extra friction, from the rule set of life, military life that we have to deal with. And so what does that mean as far as kind of grinding projects, how I have to tie up projects in the next, early spring, something like that. I still have a few antiquity armies I'd like to get through. I'd like to get through, a decent amount of the Wild West, and I feel like with my batch painting, I can do that. So I've got a few goals. My Pyrrhic army that's kind of been hanging out in the wings, the Skull army, getting it finished, some Caesarians, the Wild West stuff, and I had, especially when Warlord came out with the new American Winter Americans, the new Winter Americans. While I'm stationed here at the Screaming Eagle Division, I was really thinking about maybe painting up a small platoon of those and of the green uniform to do Market Garden, and so kind of have the Band of Brothers throughout. So I'm gonna really try to flex to get those all of those projects done in that timely nature. And I look forward to get back to gaming. I don't feel like, besides this rule set and with all the stress and work of life, it's going to be look forward to getting back to some casual games. And unfortunately, we had a player here who recently is deploying, actually two, if you talk about the new part of the year. So we've got some local people that are, as part of the military and supporting the military. They will be kind of out of the game group for extended stay, which is unfortunate. But getting down there to Track and Hole, if you followed those photos, that is a great game club, and all of those guys. I mean, there was a game of Napoleonics. There was like D&D going on. We had the Wild West game. Any group that's doing that, multiple members, and is keeping it alive, awesome stuff with James, Roger, Scott Anderson out of there. And then my absolute last thing is I will be headed to Bastogne 80 in about a week to continue to support that operation. So I'll hit the trifecta here with my time with the 101st. So I've gone to Normandy 80, Market Garden 80, and Bastogne 80 as a way to go out and leave this post in the next year. And it's been truly fortunate. So just looking forward to getting some Wild West on the table, getting some more Ancients on the table, and getting back to the bread and butter of World War II and Bolt Action version 3. What about yourself, Windhurst?
Yeah, so when we did last month's episode, I was in the middle of the wife being out of town. Her father's had some pretty serious, significant medical issues. So kind of like Kentucky's doing right now, just kind of doing the single dad thing for a bit, which really kind of cuts into... It's a lot more exhausting, I think, than we give our wives sometimes credit for. But, the wargaming project I've been doing for the Air Force. So I don't know how much I've said in the past, but in order to get it promoted and pushed out as a force-wide tool, we're going through this competition. It's kind of like Spark Tank, or we call it Spark Tank. It's kind of like Shark Tank. And right now we are at the quarterfinals. So out of, I think, 400 or 500 submissions, we were in the top 60. Awesome. And so now it's being reviewed by the SMEs, or subject matter experts throughout the force, and they'll look at it and make their recommendations, and they might reach out to the individual projects and be like, hey, this, that, or the other. And they'll advise leadership, and the leadership's going to narrow that list down to, I think, like the top 10 or so. And we feel like our chances are really good. I've gotten some good play testing in. It's gone through a lot of revisions. And, reviewing this set of rules today has been really in a different light now that I'm writing my own set of rules. And one of the things I think that's real challenging writing this set of rules is that I'm not writing it for wargamers. It's meant to be a training tool. So trying to disassociate myself with what makes sense for wargaming rules and what mechanics I would want in a wargaming rules back. All right, well, that doesn't really add anything to a training tool. Has been really really interesting and taking a lot of time.
Fun isn't your overall goal, huh?
Yeah, unfortunately, we want the training to be fun. But as a real good example, something like morale. If you're a wargaming set of rules where you're commanding a force, you expect to simulate the morale of that force. But that's not what we're doing. This is a set of training rules where one person is controlling one model that's essentially representing themselves. And so how do you represent morale? How do I say how you react in this situation that you're not really under fire? And so, like, does that add something to the training or not? Things like that is a different consideration that I wouldn't have thought of. And that is taking a lot of my hobby time. I got a couple good play tests. It's gone under multiple revisions. I've actually been able to grow the team of people helping with that. We're about 8 people now working on it across the force and the globe. And then, painting up some Western stuff for our play tests of A Dead Man's Hand. It was a nice break from 20 mil and epic scale stuff. And I still got on my table right now is more Warlord Epic, working on cavalry now, which normally I despise painting horses, but when they're this small, it's not too bad. It's over and done pretty quick. And haven't been getting too many games in. I've said it before, but I haven't found the right community here, like my last time in the UK. And my local base populace, we're such a small post, it's hard finding people with time. It would be nice to get some more gaming in. But looking forward is, here in the next month, we'll probably hear results for the semifinals of the competition for the rule sets. And then, again, I'm looking to PCS in May next year. So keeping in mind, I posted like a photo, like did an inventory of my Greek 28 mil army that I want to do. And so kind of just decided that army's not happening this year, but that's next year's project. So once I get settled into wherever we're at, the goal is to crack down. That'll probably be my main hobby focus project, with a couple side projects just to kind of mix it up and keep it fresh. Probably will still be working on Epic by then. And I still got the World War I armies and the French Indian War armies that need finishing because they got added to a lot. So kind of looking at the future. And then next month, in December, everyone can expect we'll do our year in review. So we'll look back at the whole year, and we're going to be talking about the future year for us and the podcast. It'll be a very informal discussion. So, keep an eye out for that episode. And if you kind of want an idea of what it looks like, go back and look at our last year in review episode. Unfortunately, this year we won't be able to do it in person, I don't think, just with the way life is. Kentuckian's not able to get over here, and I'm not able to get back over there this year. But Kentuckian, any final parting thoughts before we sign off?
No, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad ultimately that I think you it was always group decision, but I think you helped steer us towards this rule set, and it was awesome. And it was somebody that I came at this rule set loving Great Escape games, loving having their Hungarians and everything else, but came at them with, hey, that space is already filled for me. I don't really need that. And I think it took over. I think it's highly recommend that rule set. Really look forward to comments and feedbacks that you guys have. Tell us your thoughts on Dead Man's Hand, the transition from the first to the redo, Redux, and then tell us, other thoughts, concerns you had with what we talked about with the rules. Really look forward to kind of hearing from the group how you've done campaigns, how you've done bigger games, things that we probably wouldn't have done in a deep dive about the fringes of where we can really push and get the max flexibility of that rules. But I cannot recommend it enough to pick it up. If you've got Wild West models in your collection, I firmly believe you should own that rule set. I look forward to all the great things that you guys are doing. Please post on the On Patrol Facebook page. Let us know. Keep in contact with us. Give us the comments, and then let us know what you'd like to see in the future for this channel and for the interviews. rule sets that you'd like to, let us review. We have a few I already know in the hopper right now, but we're happy to add to the queue. And then keep us motivated. I motivate myself by posting pictures. And it was something that, even when we had the idea for this, and Windhurst had the idea for this, and we talked offline and would do all of the stuff we're doing now offline with each other with, here's my progress, here's my stuff. The idea is it kind of became an accountability section, and then it allowed us to branch out and talk about things that we normally wouldn't. And all of the engagement with the community has been good, even if maybe the people that said it didn't mean it for good. We really have appreciated feedback, and we've really appreciated you guys showing us your progress, your units that I have painted now that I've stolen ideas from and everything. And just to Windhurst's point, as he was talking during the podcast, we are about, expanding historical wargaming. We think it's great. For all you 40K guys out there, Kill Team Historical. All right, you will not be upset by this rule set. Pick it up and watch some of the spaghetti western movies, and you'll really enjoy it. Anybody who watches Tombstone, I don't know a lot of people that do not like Tombstone, and I probably don't want to know. I'm kidding. I probably don't want to know them, but no, really look forward to all the great things that you guys will comment and feedback that we can get from you, and keep me motivated with your progress, because man, these goals are a slog. And just as Windhurst with his epics are a slog, show us what you're doing, and always be willing to share those helpful hints and tricks. And that's all I have. I really look forward to seeing the feedback, and thanks again for your time.
Yep. So as we always like to say, grab your spear and your shield, your musket or belt-fed machine gun, and join us on the next On Patrol. Dismissed.